Hey folks, David Stewart here. I'm here with a good friend, Brian Niemeyer. He just came out with another book. This one's called Don't Give Money to People Who Hate You. Hopefully you can see the link in the chat there. This is a book that I think has been a long time coming and is definitely welcome. I've been saying a lot of the things that are in this book in, I guess, different ways for a couple of years now. And the book makes a lot of good points towards ends that I was kind of resistant to, as far as how large media companies view basically anyone that's not like them. And one of those things is really that it's not really about the money, but there's other things there too. Main one is that they really don't like you. And so if you're getting this message, like, why are they constantly showing people like me as bad people? It's because they think that you are a bad person. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me, Brian. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
So there's my little intro. Is there anything else you want to add to the book before we start digging into the meat?
Well, you clearly get it. It's not about money. That's what you'll hear a lot from folks who are kind of in denial, who love their guilty little pleasure. Like, oh, I know that The Last Jedi was just a piece of hate mail aimed right at me, but The Mandalorian, it's my guilty little pleasure. Like, just snuggle up with a teenage girl, depression-sized Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and binge watch it.
Yeah.
And their cope is, oh well, Lucasfilm is just going where the money is. They're just bowing to consumer demand.
Well, I made these articles probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm like, well, why do Hollywood movies suck? And like, one of the big things is there's actually, and this is actually a money argument, and I would still hold true to this, is they're rather risk adverse at the corporate level. And that's because if you're dumping like $250 million into a film, it's like, why are they constantly remaking and rehashing old crap? It's because they know that people are going to watch it. But there's a flip side to that, which I didn't cover in those videos, which is that one of the reasons that they want to do, there's other reasons why they want to do that besides the fact that it's guaranteed that people are going to show up. The fact that people are guaranteed to show up just means that they're going to do other things as well. They have another reason to do it. And so that's something that I've really had to come around to, because there's just not another explanation. You would think that enough people in a company would be interested in making money that they wouldn't do things like make torture porn about the people that they hate, but yet they seem to do it. Yeah.
And I draw on your own corporate IP ownership death cycle to make my case. Would you care to walk the audience through that one more time?
Just 1 second. I realized my icon's covered up. We gotta uncover this icon.
Oh yeah. The iconostasis visible.
People are always asking about this. I'll put a link if you want to get a copy of that version of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. This is one of many renditions of an icon that is in the Vatican, and you can see it there. It's originally an Eastern Orthodox icon, but I'll go ahead and link it in chat, and you can actually buy prints of it if you wanted to put one up in your own house because you like the aesthetics of it. People always comment on it, so there's a link if you want to get that icon from an artist and help that artist out, give him a little bit of money for making that. So it's fun. So here's the 5 stages or the 5 phases of corporate IP ownership, and it always starts with the creation phase. This is always phase 1. In phase 1, a lot of IPs never get out of phase 1, which is the creation phase. So you create something new and original. It's usually done on a low budget if it's done through the corporate infrastructure. So if it's a movie, there's things that you really have to make with a corporation because as an individual, you just don't really have the resources to do it. And one of those is movies. Movies are very expensive to make. Say AAA video games are very expensive to make. Even indie video games I've seen are very difficult to complete with a small team because it's just difficult to program a game. It's a lot of work to do. So as part of that corporation, maybe you make a movie. That's the first phase, is creation. Now, usually a studio is not going to throw a bunch of money at something that's really new unless they have someone like James Cameron attached to it. Obviously, James Cameron could make a $300 million movie on a new IP if he wanted to, but that's because he's James Cameron, not because the strength of the IP. But just for example, Star Wars was made by George Lucas on a fairly modest budget, really unproven story, and a rather new director that was just had a little bit of success going for him with things like American Graffiti and THX. And it exploded. And that's phase 2, is the explosion, where there's an unanticipated, unexpected, massive and immediate growth in popularity. This is where a creation becomes a black swan, a positive black swan. This is the random event. Everything lines up in a way that it's at the right time, the right place, the right kind of property, all happening at once, and it explodes. It goes from opening in a couple of theaters like Star Wars to being the second highest grossing film of all time, adjusted for inflation, behind Gone with the Wind. That's what I'm talking about. And we see this with lots of things. Say any of the franchises that you really love from the 70s through the 90s had this. And what you've kind of forgotten is that lots of them had that phase 1. They just didn't blow up in the same way. So in that explosion phase, usually what happens is you move to make a sequel. You move to capitalize on that explosion of popularity. And what happens with the sequel is usually you have the same creative team involved. And so the sequel is pretty good. And if that sequel is pretty good, now you have a franchise. Now you have an intellectual property. You have something that the corporation can really start to milk, and that's phase 3. So after that, phase 2 happens and that great sequel comes out. What starts to happen is the team that was responsible for that explosion starts to break up, mostly due to financial reasons, but also other personal reasons. They want to move on to other creative projects. They want to do new things. They want to do their passion projects, not just continue to work on a franchise. So the third movie in a franchise, you'll notice, is usually when things really start to move into that milking phase and maybe start to actually suck. Alien 3 is a great example. It's pretty rare that you have something that's even as good as Return of the Jedi as a third movie that maintains at least that high production quality standard. Usually that third movie, it was a joke on The Critic, this cartoon called The Critic that Matt Groening came out with years ago. It's like, don't ever see a movie with a Roman numeral larger than 2. It's like after that, they lose it. And it's the writers start to leave. You see this with series as well, a really successful TV series. All the writers start to leave after like season 2. And the reason is because when you're trying to milk it, you're trying to maximize your return. So that means the studio will start to cut the budget in certain ways. Writers want more money because they're responsible for the success. And you don't want to give them more money. No one's going to notice if you change out the writer. So you instead opt to hire younger guys that are newer, that aren't associated with the franchise, for maybe a little bit of savings. And that experienced writer, because he can command a little bit more money, he moves on to another project where he can continue to up his earning potential, and the creative team just starts to fizzle out. Everybody starts to leave. Maybe your visual effects designer, he moves on to a different project. Your director, he moves on to something else that he cares about, and maybe you still have the producer around. You might have a couple people that are left around, but you enter the milking phase, and that's when you start to see all the merchandise happen. They start to just pump out toys, the posters. Maybe there's tie-in books. That's when all that other stuff starts to happen, is in that milking phase. You're trying to extract as much value from this established intellectual property as possible. And then that milking phase inevitably creates a slow decline that leads to phase 4, which is the decline and death phase, where the quality of the product starts to become so low that the established fan base is no longer willing to pay for it. Maybe the series gets really bad in the last couple of seasons. If it's a TV series, you start to have sequels like the Highlander sequels. Highlander moved into the milking phase so quick that it almost makes your head spin. You had this first movie, which was really good. You had a second movie where people were like, what the hell was that? And you had a third movie to try to make up for it, but it was already, the budgets were being slashed. We had a TV series that really was fairly low budget and was able to milk a lot of it. And then you continue to have movies happen every so often that are of decreasing quality and decreasing resources. So you get that milking phase, and then finally it dies. Like Highlander is a dead franchise at this point. So once it's dead, that just means that the audience really is not buying enough for them to justify making anything. You might see maybe like a tie-in book come out every once in a while because that's a really cheap product to make. It's very inexpensive to hire, have a writer just do it like a spec tie-in book, like a Star Wars book. We had this with Star Wars for a long time before the prequels came out. You might have a thing like that happen every once in a while, tie-in comic, something like that, but nothing that is as substantial as the original. Then that fifth phase happens, and that is the reboot phase. That's when they try to make the franchise come back from the dead. And I think a great example of this is definitely Star Trek. Star Trek as a franchise really died. It went into this milking phase and death fairly quickly at the end of the 90s and the early 2000s, to the point where the last Star Trek movie they made with the Next Generation crew, Star Trek Nemesis, was made by a guy who hated Star Trek and refused to watch it. Think about what a stupid decision that would be from a production standpoint. So of course it didn't end up as a good movie. It was made by someone who hated the franchise, and that killed the movies for a while. The series started to dwindle. The Star Trek Enterprise series couldn't even finish its initial run, and the writers had to kind of tie everything up in season 5. And a lot of fans didn't really like it. And so it was just dormant for a couple of years. And then they rebooted it in 2009 with J.J. Abrams. And everybody gets excited for the reboot because they've forgotten the milking phase is what happens. And so they see that there's a new Star Trek movie, and they just kind of forgot how bad Nemesis was. And they really just remember, Wrath of Khan was really good. It's going to bring back Kirk. Kirk was really good. They don't even really remember very clearly the original things there, but it is enough nostalgia. Once time passes, you have enough nostalgia that you can boot things up into that reboot phase. And if it's successful, then you move right back into the milking phase and continue the cycle going from 3 to 5 forever, if possible.
Right. And it's a salient point that Star Trek Nemesis was made by someone who hates Star Trek, and I'd argue by extension, Trekkies. Right? Because or someone does. And
if you hate the product, how could you not hate the people who love the product too?
Right. And because it's part of their identity. Yeah. And I would argue that with most of the big franchises, that cycle you're talking about where they hit the moribund phase, that happened in the 90s. It happened for comics, it happened for Star Wars, it happened for Star Trek. And so you can anyone can be forgiven for making a misstep now and then. Like maybe the studio had hired the wrong guy by accident, but what we see is it happens again and again and again. Like they took the guy who messed up the Star Trek reboots, J.J. Abrams, and gave him Star Wars.
Yes.
Which gave us what you and I agree is actually, I think, the most insulting sequel movie, which is actually The Force Awakens.
Yeah, I think The Force Awakens is actually the worst of the group. And there's I've gone through this. There's a bunch of reasons. It's the least original. JJ actually did something kind of original with the third movie, as bad as it was in most places. I think I gave it a D-. I think it squeaked into a D- because of the ridiculousness of that third act. It just made me laugh. I'm like, I'd give it a 2-point bonus. It went up to D-. But anyway, it was insulting to fans. It was the same story they'd seen. It was taking the characters that, if Ryan Johnson pooped all over Luke Skywalker, but J.J. Abrams really started it with the rest of the cast, turning Han Solo back into a smuggler, making all of the growth he did in the original trilogy, which made him such a beloved character. They just negated that, and then have him get impaled by a lightsaber and thrown into a pit. Wasn't a fair treatment for, I think, an established franchise and established characters like that.
Right. And this is the same J.J. Abrams who, when confronted with the fan backlash against the sequels, said their problem isn't Star Wars. Their problem is being threatened. Right. It's this old line of, oh, well, you're threatened by diversity. You're threatened by strong female protagonists. You're threatened by something that's different. And saying this while, as you point out, he just basically remade the same movie, and all he brought to the table was the same Hollywood bubble culture, just vapid, parroted talking points. So that's why I say this isn't about money, because they wouldn't keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. I mean, these are people who run sometimes $1 trillion companies, if they want to make money, they know how.
Yeah.
They are doing something else. And this is then usually when people say, okay, well, it's politics, right? So the people who are red pilled on this issue, they take the first red pill. It's, well, the entertainment industry has a Democrat bias. They have a leftist political bias. And so they're trying to sway voters. They're trying to propagandize people. And I actually have a bone of contention with that, because that doesn't fully line up either. Because the big mistake that conservatives and people in the counterculture, right, make is assuming that the enemy has a rational motive for what they're doing. But riddle me this: how can it be rational when the ultimate logical outcome of your motive, of what you're doing, is destroying the industry and yourself in the process?
Yeah, it's and so what would you think their motivation is? Because I know what my answer would be, but I want to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
It's not political, it's religious.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I would say it's moral. So they don't put this messaging in the movie because they have a political goal with it. That's probably tangential. Like trying to convince, if you're trying to convince someone, you fundamentally approach things differently than if you're trying to humiliate them, right? I only engage like very pugilistically with people when it's for the benefit of third parties, because I know generally I'm not going to convince that person, but I can get third parties on my side. I can get third parties to not like that person and listen to me. It's part of the rhetoric game. But I would say it's moral because they think that they are doing the right thing by doing it. Now you say it's religious, and I think you and I agree on this, but this is a little bit more esoteric. So why don't you break this down a little bit?
Yeah, okay. Well, you gave us the key right there. The other side always only talks in moral terms, right? Mm-hmm. So what is politics? Politics is the art of coming up with the optimal way to organize and marshal political resources, social resources, for the optimal material good of the most people, right? It's the art of compromise.
Mm-hmm.
And it deals with practicalities. It's how do we build this possible? It's the art of possible. Exactly. Yeah, I forget who said that. But
I don't remember. It's like ideology. Yeah, it's something like politics is the art of the possible.
Right. And yet from these death cultists, you never hear anything like that. They're always only talking moral terms, like, oh, well, here's this outlandish new proposition, and if you disagree, you're a Neanderthal, you're a bigot, you're prejudiced in some way. And that's a moral judgment.
Mm-hmm. It's a judgment against a person. You're a bad person. That's a moral judgment. It's not, and it's not even saying you're wrong. It's saying you're bad.
It's saying you're bad. And
it's something conservatives say. It's like, conservatives, we say they're wrong and they say that we're bad. It's like, yeah, you should think about that.
Yeah. And
think about why that is.
And where do morals come from? And I'm not talking ethics. I'm talking morals.
Yeah, not systematized ethics. Direct morals. Yeah, they're religious.
They are. And in the case of the West, our morals come from Christianity. I mean, you can make the argument that, there was some Greco-Roman influence, but sorry, there's 2,000 years of the church exerting almost unchallenged moral authority in there, and then taking and baptizing what was good from like the Socratic, Platonic, Aristotelian tradition.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we inherit large portions of our legal systems and our cultural norms from our pagan pre-Christian ancestors, but those things have been so transformed by Christianity, they're not really recognizable. Which is why looking at a lot of Roman sentimentality from, say, the 2nd century BC, it's very foreign, because we're so used to thinking through a Christian lens. We can't really begin to understand how a pre-Christian Roman really thought, because they just had a different religion that governed them, not different sets of stories. I've gone over this. Religion is not just stories. Religion is something you practice. And why don't you get into that? Because this is the other part of their religious sentiment that I get to. This is a practice of their religion.
Absolutely. We're right on the same track here. Thanks for setting that up. So, yes. So Christianity came in as I think Chesterton said paganism was the biggest thing in the world, and then Christianity was bigger, right? And it so utterly transformed everything that came before that. We have a hard time even conceiving of that older worldview. That's what's happening now, guys. That is what Hollywood and big publishing and the big two comics creators are doing. Is, like you said, they're doing this humiliation ritual where when one ancient people had conquered other, what's the first thing they do? They would go to the temple, go into the Holy of Holies, topple the statue of that nation's god, and erect their own.
Yeah,
Like they
put the statue of Augustus on top of the Temple Mount.
Yeah, the genius of Caesar. Yeah, and that fully explains what guys like Abrams and like Ryan Johnson and like Mark Wade are doing. They are this mutant offshoot heretical cult that derived from Christianity that parasitically uses like a very twisted version of our morals, like specifically equality before God, except they get rid of God, and human dignity, except they make it conditional, and then like even original sin, except they make it racial. And they're coming back in and they're trying to topple Christ, topple the Bible, and install their vision.
Yeah, this is the thing about a lot of the a lot of the ideology. People sometimes miss this. A lot of the ideology that the left puts out, they're like, "Oh, it's nonsensical." They start engaging in the dialectic with this, and it's really just, to them, white people are oppressive colonizers tautologically. Like, it's just a self-evident fact. There's not derived from any progress of reasoning. It's just tautological to them, which means you're trying to fight the snake on the ground. The eagle and the snake.
Yeah, they've just restricted. They've narrowed original sin so that only straight white Christian men have original sin, and so white privilege is just their doctrine of the fall. Yeah. Right? You're not going to talk them out of it, and that gets back to what you're asking, which is storytelling. The great mythologist Joseph Campbell, who people debate how much of an influence he was on George Lucas, but he's always been used as a hermeneutic key to explain Star Wars after the fact, pointed out that, okay, myth, when we say myth, it doesn't mean a fable or fairy tale, a story that's not true. It's a story that a people tells to itself to explain itself and in its experience to itself.
Yeah, it's a reference of meaning.
Yeah.
So, just if we look at, say, the very first myth that begins the Bible, which is God creating Earth. Now, it's really easy to look at that and say, like, well, I don't think the Earth was created in 10 days, but that's not the purpose of that story. It's that God created the Earth with a process and intent. And this is very different from other religions of the time, which basically say the Earth arose out of chaos. I'm trying to remember the exact word for it. Maybe you can remember it. The Earth created itself. It was
formless void, tohu wabohu in the Hebrew.
Just out of chaos arose Mother Earth and Father Heaven, and they gave birth to the Titans. And most cosmology at that time centered around this arising out of chaos. And in the Hebrew, it's the opposite. The Earth didn't arise the Earth was created from nothing by God, who willed it to exist. And that's the purpose of the myth. And myths have that purpose, that meaning built into them. And this is the other thing people don't get about, say, Roman and Greek myths, is they think they're just stories about heroes. And it's like, it's not that. They're pointing to a meaning that is explaining something to the people. Like you said, it's a culture explaining something to itself.
Right. And so if you've got a different creation myth, you're dealing with a different culture. And that's what we're doing here. So I'm a trained theologian, and the way that theologians identify marks of a religion are by these three qualities. So every religion has a cult, not meaning like as in the Moonies or Jonestown, but a codified body of liturgies and worship and beliefs, and a code, which is the morals we were talking about.
Yes.
Right, code, and then creed.
Yes.
Which is their dogmas, right?
So cult, moral, and creed, guys.
If you could see these things,
then it's really easy to understand what I'm talking about when I talk about the death cult. I realize a lot of people got upset when I talked about the death cult. I made a whole video on it because I've been using this term well before I started talking to Brian. But it's only, through that interaction, I realized everybody else is seeing the same thing I'm seeing, which is this cult. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, good point. And yeah, this term has been floating around out there. I didn't coin it. I just saw, wow, yeah, that's perfect. That's what we're dealing with. And I'll get into why. Because, okay, so what's the death cult's cult? Well, they're when you look at it, they're these weird perversions of the Christian sacraments, right? So we've identified their original sin. Well, what's their baptism? Well, they've combined it with this Maoist-style struggle session where you've got to go on national television, you've got to go on Twitter, you've got to go on Facebook and confess your sin, confess your privilege and promise to do better. And then you've got to name someone else, just like in a Soviet dictatorship.
Yeah. This is the equivalent of public confession, or what Anabaptists would put as part of public confession and baptism. And it's a little different in the Catholic tradition. That would be more like confirmation, I would think. But because you're baptized as a child to get you into the church. But it's the same purpose, which is you go out and you say, it's like somebody saying the Nicene Creed or something like that. Nicene Creed is that confirmation of it's the public confirmation of your faith. Yeah,
exactly. Which is why I devised the witch test to command these people to confess that Jesus is the Christ. Yeah,
this is always one of the most fun things. I mean, to me, it's just hilarious because I know what's up, but other people get really upset about this. So let's talk about the witch test a little bit. Yeah, what's the witch test?
The witch test. Oh, okay. So you guys know that meme, right, of the smug-looking pajama boy in the glasses who says something like, "Oh,
yeah, he's got the cup.
Yeah, well, if you're Christian, then you should do insert death cult moral X here."
Yeah,
because I think it says to do that in the Bible. Something like Jesus says to be nice to people and not judge. Oh, what's that? Well, no, I'm not a Christian. And I have nothing but contempt for your Bronze Age backwards beliefs. But I'm hoping if I use your arguments against you, you'll do what I say. That's a witch.
Yeah, that's what it is. Because they have no intent of it. And I've made this point before. It's something that I think a lot of people on the quote the right, especially libertarians are very bad about this. And it's not to make anyone feel bad if they're a libertarian, but they don't think strategically. They don't think of what they're doing. They tend to think about like they have a personal code that is maybe this Randian libertarian philosophy. They don't realize that their opponents will attempt to use that against them, but have no intention of playing by those rules whatsoever. And that's something that we have to bear in mind, is that our opponents are always going to play. They will try to enforce rules upon us, but they have no intention of actually sticking to those rules.
Right. Somebody once explained in mathematical terms that conservatives play according to a Nash strategy, and the death cult uses a Pareto strategy.
Oh, this is great. Yeah, what a great explanation. Can you go a little deeper on that?
Yeah, I can. So imagine you're playing croquet. All right. So there's conservative death cultists are playing croquet, and they make a gentleman's wager, all right, about who can hit the ball further. But they make it a little more equitable, which is, okay, the conservative says, for every foot that I hit the ball east, I get $1. And then for every foot that you hit the ball north, you get $1. And at first he wants to be nice and gentlemanly, so he hits it northeast. So it goes a foot northeast, and they each get 50 cents, right? Okay. And so he's committed to fair play. He's like, well, everyone benefits from this, and we're compromising. I get my way, and he gets his way a little bit, and we kind of sail along. Well, what does the death cultist do? He just hits a ball straight north every time.
Yeah, he does what's there. And then, so after the first time that happens, what you ought to do is then begin to hit the ball the other direction. no matter what, because your opponent has proven that he's not willing to do any kind of compromise there. I also, it's also something about, I mean, let's get to the witch test first, and then I'll follow up on that with some other ideas. Actually, before I do that, good Senator, thank you for the $5. I really appreciate it. I showed my father your channel for the first time, and he loves the content. Thanks for being a based Christian in the crazy time. Thank you for watching. I really, really appreciate it. I try to be a good Christian, but I do my best. That's all that I can really hope to do, is the best that I'm capable of doing. And so I'll try to live up to that. Anyway, go ahead. So what is the witch test? So you have the smug guy come up with this coffee. Say, Jesus said to be nice and stuff. Well, I think he said that somewhere in the Bible.
Right. So immediately you then know, oh, there's a guy hitting the ball just in his direction, but trying to get you to play according to a different set of rules where you try to compromise so he can win. Mm-hmm. So you just take his mallet away.
Yeah.
And you tell him, okay, we'll confess that Jesus is the Christ and God has raised him from the dead here and now, right now, or you have no moral authority.
Yeah. If you're evoking the moral authority of Christ, surely you believe in him. Oh, no, I don't believe in some crazy sky man or something. It's like, okay, then you shouldn't mind that I am going to do something that you think the crazy sky guy wouldn't want me to do.
Yeah.
And sky guy.
Yeah. And I've heard people object, well, what about false positives? What if a Christian just takes offense to that and doesn't respond? And I respond with, well, as Jesus said, blessed is he who takes no offense at me. I mean, we are not just encouraged in Scripture to confess Jesus' lordship. We're commanded to, guys. So if you have qualms about doing it, you should go to confession. You may have some problems there. Yeah,
Jesus is the Christ. He died on the cross and was raised again on the third day. Any variation, right? You're just proclaiming the truth. How hard is that?
And then you pass.
You're a Christian and you believe it. I meet some people that are like, I'm a Christian, but I wouldn't just say that. It's like, then you don't really believe it. I'll give you a quote by, I think it's Nassim Taleb said this. He's like, it's like nobody has a bad opinion except for the people who aren't willing to take risks for theirs. In other words, if you really believe something, you'll always take a risk for it. And he's an Orthodox Christian too, by the way. So, and he understands this, that, if you're not willing to say what you believe, then it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. Clear Smash Drop, thank you for the $20. Hey, I just wanted to send some support from NorCal. Thanks for all the videos in the last few years. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And as a resident, I don't know if I'm NorCal. I'm like Central California. I think if you go any further north, you get to Sacramento County and you're in NorCal. But I live out in rural California, east of the Bay Area. And that's where I live, and I like rural living quite a bit. One of the things, and I wish there were more evidence to support. I got this hypothesis that cities make people crazy, that cities make people ill mentally on some level, because all the mentally ill people are in cities. Like if you're out in the country, it's just a different world. And if you're like California, I'm like, drive 30 minutes outside of San Jose and you're in a different country, dude. It really is like there's 3 different countries. There's LA area, Bay Area, then there's 4 other countries that are California. There's desert, coastal people, and then all the farmers, and then the NorCal people that live in, up in the Cascades up there. It's really a completely weird thing if you're ever here. It really is like a bunch of different states. Anyway, so that's the witch test.
Yeah.
You demand that somebody proclaim that they're a Christian, and then when they refuse to do it, then they're basically just giving up their argument.
Yeah, it's a presuppositional apologetics, which just takes off on the fact that even the death cult presupposes some version of Christian morality that their beliefs are parasitically attached to, and we'll try to use that as a bludgeon to beat you with. And just take it away. Just take it away.
Yeah. Now I'm going to say something about symmetry. So symmetry, when it comes to moral conflict or any conflict, is very important. And one of the reasons that the left continues to win is that it's able to leverage everything in an asymmetrical way. Morals are one of those, that it knows that people on the right, there's lots of Christians, they have a personal moral code by which they live, and they want to make that asymmetrical because they don't have that code. So they want to be at that advantage. Now, there are limits to attempting to make it asymmetrical from our side, because there are things, obviously, you shouldn't, in my opinion, I'm not a priest or anything, you shouldn't go into sin in order to get the better of your enemy or something like that. But that doesn't mean that you therefore are going to just let them play by whatever rules they want to play by, and you have to play by special rules. I think libertarians are susceptible to this because we're talking about the nature of civics and government. And so what they say is government's bad, right? And they make a general argument, government bad. Okay. Therefore, I can't use government because government bad, I can't use government in any way. But the other side's like, well, I'm going to use government to completely abolish your ability to resist any progress of government too. So you're always in a losing position. You're always fighting from the floor, hoping that somebody can't get around your guard. You're never on top, and you're never standing up in the fight.
Yeah, well, the key insight that libertarians always miss, because they have to, is that abuse does not militate against legitimate use. Okay, and it's interesting because they make that argument about the Second Amendment, right? When a leftist says, oh, well, look at all these gun deaths. And then the libertarian or the Second Amendment conservative will point out, well, look at all the good things that the guns are for, right? That doesn't argue against me having the right to have a gun, right? Well, okay, at the same time, look at all the good things government has done and can do, and the fact that it becomes tyrannical or even has a tendency to become tyrannical doesn't argue against legitimate use of government. Which again, as Christians, the Bible clearly tells us there is, guys.
Yeah, and so this is, I mean, I've made this point before that, and I kind of went on this, I don't need to repeat it, but I went on kind of a long rant the other last week on the live stream about this. Libertarianism is a philosophy that made sense within a particular time frame in a particular place in the United States, and we've now exited that. And the reason we've exited it for a whole bunch of reasons, but the main one is there's lots of things that you don't need government to do if you have other things that do them better and more efficiently. For instance, when it comes to regulating behavior, there's many things that regulate people's behavior. There are, people's religious sentiments will regulate their behavior. The community and the culture that you live in will regulate the behavior. Your family will regulate your behavior. With all these things that put restrictions on us and stop us from having a libertine lifestyle. Well, once those things are removed, and there's problems resulting from people not restricting their behavior in a whole variety of ways. Can you really say that it's bad to have government restrict that when there's nothing else that does it? That culture's gone. So the whole idea of saying, we shouldn't jail people for, it's like maybe drugs should be legal. Well, what else is going to stop people from doing drugs? You have to have a highly localist culture that's very unified that can really condemn people doing that, to keep it restricted enough that it doesn't become a significant social and legal problem or generate other problems on its own. And I'm not arguing for prohibition here, because that's going to be binary thinking, which is a problem as well. But that's just an example, right? It's like when you have the culture that does all the work for you, you don't need government, but it's still very useful to have government to do lots of things. Like, for instance, fight wars.
Yeah, under conditions where libertarianism is possible, it's not needed. And under these conditions, it's under other conditions, it's not possible. So.
Yeah. Or you also have this thing where just using kind of this recent pandemic as an example, everyone in Japan put on masks and engaged in social distancing right away. There was no civil unrest. There wasn't some big conspiracy theory. It's really just the government is made up of Japanese people. It's so in line with its culture that the idea that there would be some grand conflict between the government and its people, it just doesn't really happen there. The government is the people in essence. So when there's a strong agreement between the people who are representatives and who are running the government and the people themselves who are electing those representatives, then the idea of limited government just kind of becomes a moot point because the government's not doing a bunch of things that the people themselves don't want to do. It's only when we have this kind of imperial setup that we have where the people are radically separated from the people in power, and they have each of those two different sets of people have radically different desires for how they want their life arranged. Do we have this conflict of government's too big and it's really bad, or that we need government to solve these social problems because there's no community to solve them? The argument for welfare is just that there's no one in the community helping the poor, so the government has to pay them. Well, that's a problem on the local level. You know, it's kind of like using a sledgehammer to hammer in an errant nail. You know, it just doesn't work well. Another reason, Dreadnought, $5. Another reason the left wins is it's entropic. It's always harder to fight degeneracy than for it. The right must be vigilant. Left is opportunistic. Yeah, that's there. You're trying to stand still. This is why conservative is, I think, also a moot concept at this point. And I would prefer to replace it with optimate or optimate, which is an old Roman term. Sola was an optimate or an optimate. It's just for the good, for the best way of doing things, the good men. Because we have to go back at this point. We're no longer conserved. We haven't conserved anything.
Let's go all the way back.
Yeah, we have to go backwards. We need a revival. You have to do something different. You have to be for something specific. And actually, I talked about this in a video called Anti. It's really hard to keep people together in being unified against something. It's easy to initially get a bunch of people together and be like, okay, Romans are coming. Let's all band together to fight the Romans. And then as soon as the Romans leave, what happens? You go back to fighting each other because you don't have any common ground. You're not for anything. You're only against something. So conservatives have been against things in a whole smattering of kind of haphazard ways, and it just hasn't really worked out for us.
Yeah, that's why it's like, that's why Dreadnought perceives it as hard to fight degeneracy. But in the past, it wasn't hard to fight degeneracy. You throw them in jail. I mean, we can't conceive of that because we've been conditioned by the left to think we can only play according to this Nash strategy. Right? Well, we can't hit the ball due east. You know, that might make them mad.
Yeah. And here's the problem too, is like every compromise moves you closer to the socialist and the leftist ideal. So you start where it's like, well, let's say we're at point zero. We're way past point zero, but if we're at point zero right now, we don't want to move any further to the left. Every piece of legislation the left enacts at any level is trying to push you to the left. On your screen, it should be going to the left, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. To the left. It's my right, but to the left. We're trying to push you to the left. Well, so you make a compromise. You guys want to go 50 feet to the left. Let's just go 25. That's conservatism. It's just progressivism. What do we call it? It's progressivism at the speed limit. So, it's slightly slower what you don't want. Like that's somehow better. No, we want zero. So every time you compromise, you're pushing further and further to the left. And over time, you can see it where like the Republicans have like Medicare Part D back in the early 2000s, which would have been unheard of to have that be an actual conservative piece of legislation, but it was a compromise. Well, we'll give you prescription drugs. Well, we'll give you this. You're just marching further to the left, which is why you need to be an optimist, which is to say, no, not only are we not going to the left, we're going further to the right. Okay. Oh, well, and then the art of compromise then becomes, okay, well, you want prescription drug coverage. That's great. We want to restrict pornography to make it much harder for people to access it. Mm-hmm. Whoa, what kind of compromise is that? It's like, that's a compromise. We really want to reduce the degeneracy in society, and in return, we will socialize part of the medicine system.
Yeah.
Who would have the balls to do that? I don't think anyone would.
No one right now.
You compromise with pornography. We'll just restrict pornography by 50% in exchange for the Medicare Part D.
Yeah, which is why I ask conservatives, okay, where do you stop? What is the bridge too far for you so that in 10 years, you won't just be holding the same exact opinions as a Democrat now? Because if you look at your at current orthodox conservative beliefs, they're the same as like Obama's first platform.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Barack Obama was against gay marriage. And now it's like, you're against gay marriage, you awful, awful bigot. You terrible person.
Yeah, so where do you stop? And there can't be an answer because they gotta keep playing by that book that the enemy gave them, which ensures they will never be a serious detriment to the enemy. So, and what I want to talk about along those lines, because here's where the book ties in, is giving money to people who hate you is giving aid and comfort and resources to the enemy.
Yeah. Yeah, and so let's get back on topic with don't give money to people who hate you. So there's actually a couple layers here. So let's start with that first one. Can you say that again?
Yeah. And it ties into what you're talking about sin earlier, that fighting tyranny is not a sin. Well, cooperating with it is. And that's why I take the same tack as the enemy. I research Christian morality in the book and argue against giving people the money who hate you, not on economic, but on moral terms. Yeah. Because again, I'm trained in moral theology. Okay. So, and there's this process called the principle of double effect. Okay. Which is when there are two results from one act, one good and one bad. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the principle of double effect examines those cases and asks, okay, well, at what point is the evil tolerable enough that it is morally okay to perform the act? So, for example, paying a movie ticket to, or let's put it this way, paying to pre-order The Last of Us 2.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a sin. That's sinful, guys. You deform your soul by doing it. Don't do it. Because you become you become, depending on what your dispositions are, either a remote material cooperator with the evil they're doing, meaning you give them material aid and comfort, but you don't will the evil effect. You're like, I just want to kick back and enjoy a game. I want to play a game. Well, that's good in and of itself. But the secondary consequence of you paying for the game is you're furthering Neil Druckmann's evil. You're furthering his reign of terror in Naughty Dog. Yeah. And
you're giving him money to do that for part 3. Too.
Yeah. And, I mentioned this before. So, because then people bring up, oh, well, I noticed your book is on Amazon and Jeff Bezos he's like Sauron to Druckmann's Saruman or something, right? And yeah, I mean, it's as if we're not going to admit that. It's like, yeah, I'm participating in the evil by doing business with Amazon, and
yeah,
you want to get into the moral theology of it.
Yeah,
okay.
I like the way you explained it. I had it in another way. It's just like,
go ahead.
You're comparing something which is optional to that which is not optional. If I don't sell a book on Amazon, that just means I'm not selling books.
Yeah.
Or I'm selling such a tiny fraction of them that it's just not worth being in the business. You know, it's like saying, well, I want to sell shovels, but not at Home Depot or Lowe's. It's like, well, I think you're going to have a problem selling shovels because those are the two big stores that sell shovels. So do you want to sell shovels or not? But it's like, okay, don't.
Yeah.
Let's say we want to march to Rome and we want to conquer Rome because Rome is an evil tyranny in this lifeboat scenario I'm concocting. Are you going to say we need to not use the Roman roads because they were built by slaves? They actually weren't. They were built by the armies for the most part. But let's pretend they were built by slaves. Are we going to not march on roads that were built by slaves or built by the Romans because we hate the Romans? No. We will march on the Roman roads and it will get us more swiftly to Rome, which we will then destroy, or wherever you're thinking. It's a product of binary thinking that everything you do is either all good or all bad and doesn't have those two effects like you talk about.
Yeah, and I want to be careful to avoid consequentialism here, which is ends means thinking, right? What I'm saying is, okay, so me offering my book for sale on Amazon. Consequences, there are two. One, people who need to be informed by this book get this book, which is good. Consequence two, Jeff Bezos gets 30%. Okay, which is way less than the 85% that like Simon & Schuster or Tor would get if I went through Old Pub, okay? But even that's just consequentialism. But the point is, I make my living doing this, okay? I'm a professional writer and editor. This is where I get my food, so I have to do this. So I have a compelling, serious reason to offer my books on Amazon, and that makes the small evil tolerable. Okay, you do not have a compelling, serious reason to buy The Last of Us 2.
Yeah, I mean, let's say that you're a doctor, right? And you work in a place that has socialized medicine, and you're against socialized medicine. But that just means that if you're going to say, "Well, I refuse to work for the socialist medicine system," that just means you refuse to be a doctor. You know, it's a closed game. You don't have the option. You can't compare something optional to something unoptional. $2. Thank you, Philip, for the $2. What we tolerate, our children will embrace. I'm reminded also of the rule of the least tolerant wins. One of the reasons that Christianity became the dominant religion throughout Europe was because it was not tolerant. Now, not intolerant in the way that the death cultists will parade on about what they think intolerance is, which is just saying, we think it's wrong that you're doing this. That's our intolerance. That's the kind of intolerance that we're talking about, is that Christians did not tolerate, they wouldn't tolerate other gods. They wouldn't worship other gods. They refused to be part of the cults of the Roman Empire. And in the end, that gave a very clear definition as to who was Christian, who was not, what that community meant. It forged stronger bonds between them. And eventually that is what turned the Roman Empire into a Christian set of peoples rather than being completely pagan. You know, it's the rule of the least tolerant. Same reason why you can go buy something at a store and it's kosher. Like, why is this kosher? There's no Jews that live here, maybe. You know, it's like, well, because Jews will not eat things that aren't kosher, but everyone will eat kosher. So it's just easier to make something kosher. There you go.
Yeah.
They don't tolerate non-kosher food. Now, actually, I saw something interesting that just like kind of piqued me about this, which is that at the height of the Roman Empire, couldn't you pay all your taxes in one day's work? Depends on the person. But you didn't have individual taxation. Individual taxation is novel to the 20th century. Rather, you exacted tribute. Your local area, your local government had to pay Rome. And so what they would do is they would have tax collectors go around and just grab a bunch of money from people to pay Rome. So Rome didn't come in and stomp you into the freaking ground. So the tax system was very different. It wasn't individualized the way that we think about it at all. You know, there wasn't like something like you had to pay 15% of your income. No one tracked income. No one kept track of that, which is why the poor were probably harder hit, as the tax collectors would want to get the same amount from someone poor versus someone rich. I just want to point that out. Kind of interesting thought. Terrific stream, David. Thank you for the $2. I appreciate it. This discussion is needed. I think the book is needed. So hopefully you saw it there in chat. There's also a link to the audiobook version of Keys to Prolific Creativity, which Amazon has finally approved after a month and a half of it being on their stacks. So if you join Audible from that link, I'll actually get a bounty. So if you're thinking of picking up Audible in order to listen to audiobooks, now's a good time to listen to them. If you're you know, doing some work. I know a lot of people are not commuting now, but that doesn't mean that it's not good to listen to an audiobook while you do something like mow the lawn, which is what I tend to do, or do the dishes. So if you're thinking about joining that, you can use that link, and that will actually give me a little bounty, give me a little bit of money.
Yeah, your book is a great companion piece to mine, because one thing I touch on is coming up with alternatives. And David's book gives you tools to create your own alternatives to death cult products if you're so inclined. And you should be supporting people who don't hate you anyway.
Yeah. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on destroying degenerate culture. I think we must do more than just produce new IPs. How do we burn them down? Well, it's not. So I think, I don't know if I want to give Brian first crack at this. Brian, you answer first.
We take control of the government and throw them in jail. It's pretty simple. We just don't have the will to do it. But the Zoomers might, and Generation Alpha, Generation G, whoever's after them, they probably will. But yeah, we need to use the power of the state to crush them. I'm not Fed posting here, but that's how it's done.
Well, see, and to me, it's the power of what state? Because I'm really a fractal localist, which is to say, I think the local government should be the only one that's really relevant to people. Because you have different amounts of loyalty and responsibility depending on where you are. You know, you're more loyal and responsible to your family than a random person in Washington, D.C. who has no connection to you. So you only have the biggest parts of government should really only be concerned with the things that affect everybody, which is going to be, things like common defense. And otherwise, locally, I think it should be permitted to ban what you want to. If you don't want people to partake in certain activities, you simply say that we're not going to have those there, or you do something like a hybrid system where those degenerate activities are limited to very specific places where you can control and monitor them, and they don't occur outside of that, which keeps them from being omnipresent. It's the omnipresence of certain kinds of destructive behaviors, I think, that affect us, including drugs. Not just, it's not just drugs. There's a whole smattering of things. But the other thing is, they will burn themselves down too, because you have to think that the modern death cultist does not have children because they believe in the death cult. So their philosophy only continues if they can communicate it to your children. So they will burn themselves down over time as long as you don't give them access to your children. And at the same time, you have to counter that with other information that's going to shore up the optimate message. That's going to make the proper cultural message be pervasive. And then they'll burn themselves down. Same thing with, say, like there's no intellectual property, no franchise that's too big to fail. If people stop buying it, then it will burn down immediately. They'll run out of money. The question is how long it's going to take to do that. So as an individual, the question is, what do you do? And the answer is you don't give money to people who hate you. And instead you propagate IPs that are actually going to be good as well. And the bad ones will burn themselves down. That's my opinion.
Yeah, it brings to bear the twin principles of solidarity and subsidiarity, which is that subsidiarity says the problems are best solved at the smallest and most local level. And so you start with the family, and if the family can't solve a problem, then you take it up to you escalate to the next level, right? Which is
tribe.
The neighborhood, the tribe, the city, the county. And yeah, there are some problems though that only a strong central government can solve, like you said, like the national defense. But yeah, its power should be limited to only what's necessary. But then there's also the principle of solidarity, like you point out with the Japanese. They're a great example, right? We're one for all for one. We're in this together. We are a coherent people with our own dreams and goals, and our government reflects us. And as we are getting at right now, ours currently doesn't. It's dominated by death cultists who live in the same super zips, and their kids go to the same schools and marry each other. So just like we can't imagine how ancient Greeks really thought, our rulers don't know anything about us. They don't understand us. They don't know what we want or how we think. And that's really the root of all these problems.
Yeah. So this is a really good comment that Waylon just popped up here. I would like to hear both of your opinions on banishings. Would that be a more effective system for not creating rebels in a fourth generational warfare way of things? Well, there are several answers here. The first one is we have a form of banishment right now, but the left uses it, and call it cancel culture, which is, and one of the things you have to understand about cancel culture is that it's never about what you said or did. It's about who you are and what you represent. And once you know that, then it's much easier to deal with that. But what happens is somebody makes a joke and somebody says, well, an old white man made a joke. I'm going to say it's sexist and we're going to get him fired and make sure he can never work again. So if you take away someone's millstone, what's the Bible verse? To take a man's millstone is to kill him. Is that what it is? Anyway, so you take away his ability to, when you banish someone from Rome, nobody could give them like water, food, or fire for like however many hundreds of miles outside of Rome. Man, it could really kill them if you exiled them from Rome. So that means no one could give you succor. We do that right now through social media, or the left does it, to say, okay, this person will be fired from their position. Even Richard Dawkins, who is, I don't know what to call him. Yeah, I don't like Richard Dawkins that much, but he made a joke and then he got unpersoned by the left, meaning that even if you're on their side, they don't really care. But so they we're going to get them fired. We're going to get their social media profiles removed. We're going to make it so no one can ever hire them again. And anybody who tries to help them will also be punished by us. That's the modern cancel culture. So it is very effective. Lots of people just shut the hell up. And in fact, that's almost what I really recommend anyone in a corporate environment do. I think the Pence rule should be in full effect, and I recommend it for young teachers. If you're a young teacher, particularly if you're a male teacher, because there's more focus on them, but this also applies to female teachers, you have to have the Pence rule, which basically means you don't have any contact. You don't have any one-on-one contact with someone of the opposite sex. You don't have any one-on-one contact with a student. You don't have any one-on-one contact. You have all of your contacts and all of the things that you say are always in the presence of groups, because that's going to eliminate the ability for them to do a he said, she said, and to be to you. That's the world we're living in. You have to recognize that. So the first thing is to have a strong defense against that. And then, this is the really hard part. You have to give people that are more willing to violate the mores there, more willing to violate the banishment, give people water and fire.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was Z-Man who wrote that the day when a man just openly laughs in a sensitivity training seminar put on by HR is when this ends. Just when we start laughing at the cult and their ridiculous Byzantine creed.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we used to laugh through that stuff, but now if we were to laugh, we'd get fired, which is where we're at. And it's like, there's probably people in HR don't agree with that either, but they feel hamstrung as well, because you don't want that stuff to go public. Kaku says at this point, companies are doing it for control. Now, I would say partially, you want to control your workers, but I think it goes back to that religious thing. It's part of them just expressing their creed. Of course, they have to educate you on how bad you are and how complimenting a woman is actually harassing her. Of course, you need to be educated on that, because you're a bad person that has bad thoughts, and you have this bad original sin called who you are and what you represent: white, male, Christian, straight person.
Yeah,
and by the way, white, straight women, you guys are next on the block. So don't. It's like we're already attacked. They just keep adding targets, because you're just one rung down on the progressive stack. So white women, you're next.
Yeah,
and white women are upset when they get called Karen.
Yeah, we got a lot of super chats, so I'm gonna hurry up here. But I just want to amplify what both you and EC2189 Kaku said. Yeah, it's all a horrible tapestry, because in the old days under Stalin, if you were a thought criminal, then the party would throw you in the gulag. Like the state itself would do it. What's happening now in America and the West is, although not so much in Europe, it's more of an American thing. Our cultural commissars relax the dissident to the secular arm, as it were. So the corporations act as their bagmen to enforce the e-banishings. So yes, the corporations are doing it as control, but they're
more like the enforcer, right?
Yeah, they're the secret police. Yeah.
Yeah. Gene Sunny 226, thank you for the $5. I really appreciate it. Great discussion, David. I purchased Brian's book today. Good job. I look forward to reading it. Brian gave me a free copy because I'm very special, but it's good.
Yes.
And I read Brian's blog all the time, so I had a lot of this stuff already. I kind of worked out how he thought about this stuff too. Now, the other thing I want to talk about as we get through these super chats is how to have fun doing it, because that's the other part of the book too. I don't want to just talk about doom and gloom. And I called it a memo. I almost wanted to call it manifesto on reviews. Just like, we need to focus on the positive. People need to feel good about what they're doing. It's really important. But let me get to the super chat from Imp Reb. $10. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Education is the next fight, because it's the only offensive ground the right has taken. We can't lose it, because education is how the left has been able to reproduce it all. They will want to take it down. So that's now the question is, what does that mean? Does that mean we try to take control of the educational institutions that have been co-opted, or does that mean we need widespread people to homeschool? I'm a parent. I homeschool. So I'm taking the second route, because And I was a public school teacher, so I have actually taken both routes. As a Christian that taught public school, I was part of the institution, and that meant that I could communicate ideas to kids. And I often had kids tell me, like, it's like, you're the only teacher that told me like better things to do in my life. Because this is like a music class. He's like, I didn't really care about music, but you told me like better things to do, how to get a job. It's like, Mr. Stewart told me how to get a job. It's like, of course, I want you to succeed. If you're not into guitar class, that's not a big deal because you're forced to be here. And I know that. I'm not going to hate you for not loving my class, but I want you to be successful in life. And that's really important. Anyway, so I think it's really hard to take control of institutions, and it takes a long time. That's a generational kind of warfare. But certainly as an individual, homeschooling is a better option for the education. It's one-on-one, or 1 to 4 if you have 4 kids, let's say. It's still going to be, you're going to have a lot of kids before you are approaching the inefficiency of 1 to 30 that we have in public schools. So you have a much more efficient use of time. Kids can work as much as they want to or need to on an item, or as little as they need to on an item. Reality is that you can homeschool kids on a couple of hours a day compared to all day at public school, and have time to do other things which will enrich their lives too, like learn music or art, or just go out and play.
I can confirm, by the way.
Yeah. Or you were homeschooled, right? Yes.
I was not.
No.
I went to Catholic school, and I have a firm policy of not discussing my family on the internet for various OPSEC reasons, but I can confirm from direct personal experience your homeschooling experience.
Yeah, it's always going to be more, there's this idea that you have to have an expert teacher. Well, I can tell you, having been in the system, most teachers are not expert at anything. Most teachers are average at best. They're not going to be any better than a parent. So as a parent, just because you don't have a degree in literature, don't think that you're going to be a worse English teacher than what your kid would have at public school. You probably will be better for so many more reasons than I can get into. But the main one is you have, that kid has all of your attention, whereas he has no attention from a teacher. It's just impossible. He's receiving passive information and hoping to get a good grade on a paper. That's public education. Whereas being able to sit around and really discuss a book or anything like that. You don't have to be a literature major to teach English well. In fact, I don't want to go so far as to say you'd be better without it. But as a writer that doesn't have a literature degree, who's constantly seeing writers who have literature degrees write bad books, I kind of feel like a literature degree doesn't help you be a better writer, at least. How to establish a moral aristocracy. Thanks, Kings. Thank you, Colonel Boyle. I really appreciate the super chat. So how do we establish a moral aristocracy? The optimates, the optimates. That is a moral aristocracy. Mos maiorum, which is the greatness of tradition, is part of that to me. What do you think, Brian? You have any thoughts?
Yeah, and that is really the crux of the issue, because every society is hierarchical. You always end up with some of the folks on top, right? And that's good. That's natural. Human civilization naturally falls into hierarchies. Our problem is that, as with the French Revolution and the Soviet Empire, we have an aristocracy that hates us, right? So not like the Japanese government, which is like looking out for the interests. We are under occupation by a hostile alien culture. And again,
it is more like I want to make this point. It's more like an empire. It's not like we're governed by ourselves. And that's maybe how things kind of started out.
It's not like an empire. It is an empire. So
it's really, I think we've been an empire since since after the Civil War, when it was, which amendment was it, the 13th Amendment or the 14th? All residents of the states are citizens of the United States and the state that they reside in. So basically, we no longer were Virginians that were part of this larger alliance called the United States. Everyone was an American by declaration. Everyone was part of the empire, citizens of the empire. And yes, there's local governors. The Romans had local governors too. So how do we establish a moral aristocracy? That is a hard question to answer.
Yeah, it is, but in large part, it's something that's going to kind of work itself out. And I don't want to urge people to complacency here, but when the people in charge can't do their jobs, everybody suffers, including in the end them, which is another reason I call this a death cult, because if you look at what's going on in Washington and in the boardrooms of the big companies, these people are making disastrously self-defeating decisions, which are going to be bad for them in the end. So I would just prefer that they wake up and listen to us and actually step outside their bubble for a second. Go to a barbecue in Kansas City, go bowling in Indianapolis or something. Just see how the other half lives so you can get a different perspective, because you're laying the seed, you're sowing the seeds of your own undoing, cloud people.
Yeah.
These types of situations can't last.
Yeah, and how does the death cult reproduce? Well, the death cult does not reproduce by producing children who then inherit the values of their parents. They only reproduce by infesting other people. It's like a zombie plague. How does someone become a zombie? They get bitten by a zombie. Okay, zombies only reproduce, via killing other people. They can't have children. It's all right. It's like there was a World of Warcraft faction, the undead faction. It's like, orcs can have babies, but how does the undead faction will only decrease as you kill more of them. They'll just go away because they don't reproduce at all. They only reproduce by killing humans and then raising them from the dead, which is horrible. Or kind of like vampires. Vampires, they are kind of an inversion of, as a folkloric monster, they're a great inversion of everything. They can't reproduce. They're like a prurient being, like a sexual being that can't reproduce under most mythologies. They reproduce through like blood baptism or by biting somebody, by infecting them and turning them into a vampire. And at the same time, it's like you were going to say probably, what were you going to say about it?
Yeah, exactly what you're saying is it's in Western literature, the figure of the vampire is an anti-Eucharistic trope.
Because instead of drinking the blood of Christ, they drink the blood of a person to give them temporary horrible life in sin rather than eternal life in heaven. It's a spiritual inversion, and that's why it makes them such great monsters to me. And maybe people like to complain about vampires post Anne Rice, but I think just as a folkloric monster, they're brilliant. The horror of and this is something this is totally tangential, and I'll get to your super chat, Dreadnought, in just a second. But it's such a good point, and I will probably make some more content on this. The time when the vampire was a horrible monster to be feared was a time when we were spiritual because of what the vampire represents. He represents an eternal state of sin that we don't want to be. We don't want to be a monster forever. It started to shift to something like, wouldn't it be cool to be a vampire once people lost the idea that, an eternal state of sin is bad? Once people lost the idea, the existential dread of an eternally fallen state as a monster, once people shed that, then it became really like, I wonder what it would be like to be a vampire. I bet it would be cool. You get to live forever and stuff. I bet that'd be fun. That really comes from a place that's discarded the actual spiritual horror of the vampire. The horror of the vampire is that you become a monster, not that you die. There's something worse than death called monstrousness. Same thing with being a zombie. Being a zombie is worse than being dead.
Agreed.
All right. Cloud people want to die. Just want us to die first. This is a great point, Dreadnought. When I've said about the death cult before, the death cult is not about you dying. In fact, what they will offer you is kind of like that vampiristic Eucharist. They offer you the illusion of life by getting you to trade the things which perpetuate your existence through the ages. That is reproducing. So that's the first thing they attack you on. So they have different things. They have abortion. Abortion is very obviously controversial, and since I said it, maybe the stream will get demonetized. But it's controversial for good reasons. But just on a broad layer, it's taking away your progeny. It's removing your children from their existence. So they get you to not reproduce. They get you to engage in riotous living rather than to plan cautiously to give to your children and your grandchildren after you depart this world. So rather than leaving it, they get you to not leave a legacy of any kind. It's not
and
just
to bring it full circle, abortion is the death cult's version of communion. It is there, just like the vampire, right? And with the Project Veritas videos, and I forget the other organization that a couple years back caused a sensation by releasing those videos. Or Planned Parenthood admitted they sell the infant parts to companies, right? So yeah, it's from the Moloch worship. They're sacrificing humans, in this case children, the most innocent, and then consuming them. It's anti-Eucharistic.
I want to address something that Hardwick said here. The early Christian church spread almost purely by evangelism, not physical reproduction. It's true, because it spread quickly. The Apostle Paul even recommended not getting married. He did. I don't think that's correct. Because you're not defining the difference between, say, priestly celibacy and the normal state. In fact, it said it was better to get married rather than to live in sin. In other words, if you want to have that, you should have that. And I think it's if you want it, I'm living basically a celibate lifestyle. I'm not going to pull up the verse right now, but that's a mistake that a lot of people I think make, is that there's some sort of early Christian drive towards full celibacy. That wasn't the case, and really has not been the case throughout all of church history. And the church, of course, it grows to new people, but the population of Europe has also grown a lot since Christian times, and that growth was Christianity as well. So I mean, it grew both ways, but one is the quick way where you're trying to evangelize everyone, and the other one is the long way where you are just spreading your culture. You know what I mean? Any thoughts, Brian?
Oh, a lot. I'm trying to restrict them down. I mean, yeah, Paul did say that. I mean, I think it's clear that he's showing that the celibate life, like the consecrated life, is a higher state than the married life. But at the same time, he's not saying that the married state is non-normative. And then he also does follow up with, but I don't have it in front of me, but like if you're burning, right, like the sexual desire, it is better to get married than like to be consumed by it. And I believe it's the Council of Trent in the Catholic Church, which did say, like, if any would say that
I'm going to turn on a fan.
Yeah, celibate state is like inferior to the married state. Let him be anathema, right? So there's this dogmatic, actually, assertion in the Catholic Church that celibacy is the higher calling. But what people don't get is that's not because the married life is bad. Okay, what Paul's saying and what Trent is saying is that celibacy is a sacrifice, because human sexuality is normal. It's an essential part of who we are. I mean, that's one of the things that we say that differentiates us from the death cult, right? That there's God made them one man and one woman, and you shall cleave to your wife and become one flesh. So that's normal and good. The value of a sacrifice is directly dependent on the value of the good you're giving up. So by saying that celibacy is higher than marriage, that's actually paying a great homage to marriage, because celibacy is only greater because of the high, great dignity of marriage, which the priest or the monk or the nun is giving up.
Yeah, and that's the idea of the priestly calling being a higher calling itself. That's not to say that you're bad for not being a priest. That's right. There's some sort of meritocracy there.
The Vatican II did clarify that. Anyway, go ahead.
The Vatican II did clarify that. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the
and actually, that you and I have spoken about this before, which is Humanae Vitae, is something that has been very controversial, and it was something that that the Pope actually instituted over the recommendations of the Council, if I remember correctly.
Well, it wasn't part of Vatican II. It was
it was before that, wasn't it? or was
I think
after?
it was a little after, but yeah, it was the same Pope. It was Paul VI who concluded Vatican II, which John the 20th, now St. John the 23rd started. And yeah, you were correct. He did it over the objections of his advisors. And I've got the four prophecies that Paul VI included in it. And let's see how many of these he got right. So first he said, if artificial contraception is widely accepted, we will see an increase in infidelity and moral decline, a loss of respect for women, an abuse of power. So government intrusion into people's sex lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one more thing, and also lulling man into this false sense of unlimited dominion, meaning that thinking that mankind can have unlimited dominion over our bodies, men in the generic sense of both men and women.
Yeah. Now this, I mean, it was, I think it was very prophetic. I think you and I have talked about this, and I'll get to that super chat, Brian, in just a second, because it's a great one. But that's, I don't know what part, I don't know how he was influenced on that, or like if the Holy Spirit was speaking to him on something like that. But what a prophetic vision that has now come to pass. This is before we saw any of the consequences of anything like hormonal birth control happening. All of this stuff was new on the scene. And he saw it as, it's a danger. Well, what's the only group of people? What's the only religion of Christians that's really still making more people? And it's Catholics. So over time, atheists who have far fewer children can really only make more atheists empirically, whereas Catholics make more Catholics through the natural method. That's interesting to think about for me. And I've kind of twisted my mind about Humanae Vitae a bunch of times because it was such an interesting thing, and it's become so ubiquitous with Catholicism that people don't realize that it's a recent and important thing, not that it's some kind of ancient tradition that's been bound up in the church since the beginning. It in one way it has been, but it's more just a reaffirmation of really dogma that's been passed down through the ages.
What you're talking about is development of doctrine, like Cardinal Newman explained when he was Anglican and he was searching for the authentic church, like the church in the line of the apostles. And he said you'd see this authentic development of doctrine, which doesn't present a rupture with the past, right? It's an unfolding of the deposit of faith over time, because like the Bible itself says, there's much else that Jesus did. I doubt all the books in the world could hold it if we wrote down everything. And what that means is, the scriptures we were handed down on their own are not meant to be a one-stop shop for every particular problem. That's why we have sacred tradition and a magisterium to interpret, excuse me, these new moral quandaries come up, like, gene editing and artificial contraception, hormonal artificial contraception, because they, of course, have had artificial contraception for eons. But yeah, Humanae Vitae is an unfolding of church tradition, because the Didache, the ancient Christian manual, right? They preach against artificial contraception and abortion in that, and that's, I think, like 3rd century.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's discussions, there's Talmudic discussions on the Jewish side too that have to do with that go back hundreds and hundreds of years as well. I mean, this stuff was talked about long ago in ways that people often don't think of, because abortion has been around in different capacities. We don't do it as precisely. They didn't do it as precisely and medically as we do it now, where a doctor goes in and performs it like a medical procedure. I don't want to get too deep into it, but that's true. I skipped the super chat I wanted to read. Sorry, Brian. Paraphrasing Tolkien, evil is incapable of original creation. Tying right back in what we're talking about. Can you think of any new IPs that came from the death cult? It seems inherently parasitic. Can I think of any? I mean, The Last of Us might be one of them, but I think The Last of Us was unintentionally good. Is what I think might be. Is that when I talk to people about it, and it's not a game that I really liked enough to like finish all the way. It wasn't like a bad game, really, but it wasn't my kind of game. That's all. It just didn't have gameplay that I loved. People were really attached to the characters and the way that the characters were expressed. And I think that there's nihilistic stuff in that original story as well. But, could a death cultist create a character that someone else likes? Yeah. But look what they do with it immediately. If the minute they create something that is good, they must also destroy that thing. That thing that cannot live long, even if it's accidentally created. Kind of like, if an orc can shed the influence of Morgoth and become good, does that mean that Morgoth is going to tolerate orcs like leaving his dominion? The answer is like no. Right. So they probably won't live long that way, nor is that orc going to be able to perpetuate itself very well at all. But it is very parasitic because look at all the IPs they do with Marvel, Star Trek, Star Wars, Ghostbusters, all of the stuff that it's true. And it goes back further. It's like, when are we going to get another Back to the Future movie? Hopefully never. When are we going to get another when are we going to get a good Terminator movie? It's never going to happen again.
Nope.
It's not going to happen again.
Right. And to tackle the super chat, let me make a brief word substitution. So can the Death Cult create new IPs? Sure, for certain values of IP. Can they create art? Nope.
Yeah, art points to the truth. I've talked about this with Jesse White. He's going back to like the pre-romantic self-expression version of art. And we like romantic painters a lot on this channel. But the idea is, what does art express? Well, it expresses truth. Art is just truth. That's what art is. Now, does that mean a photograph is truth? Well, art is truth in a different way from a photograph because it's filtered through the mind of the artist to express. So that's why a portrait of a person looks so different from a picture. The portrait expresses in a lot of ways more of who they are than a snapshot will. A momentary facial expression can't encapsulate the person the way a portrait can. Just like if we could go back and take a photograph of Christ, it could not fully contain who he was. That's why iconography is so full of symbols, because there's so much that gets bound up in who a person was, whether it's Mary or it's a different saint or it's Christ himself. The art expresses the truth. That's the point of that.
An icon is a window through which it's a golden window through which we are actually beholding the blessed in glory.
And if you're creating an icon in the traditional fashion, that would include prayer and fasting so that you can properly express that truth and you can properly give that window. Iconography is a very interesting subject. We don't have too much more time to just go off on iconography, but I love iconography, and I love different ways that cultures express iconography. There's Japanese iconography that's a little bit different expression than European iconography, because there's Japanese Christians that of course lived under oppression under the Tokugawa shogunate and produced great works of art as part of that as well. The icon is supposed to point to the truth. That's kind of how I feel about it. And art in general is supposed to as well. So that's kind of, I don't know, that's what I think about it. Harbinger 359, the notion that Paul supports celibacy out of hand is a misunderstanding that I myself had for a long time. Paul was not talking about people who had never married. He was talking about remarriage. The original language makes this pretty clear. Okay, that's a great point as well. I don't want to go build it up and have some kind of big theological discussion about that. But I think, and I've had a couple people, and this kind of goes back to this witch test thing where they're like, Paul said here to be celibate and you're having kids. It's like, no, I don't think so. I don't think he said that. And it's also like, well, my interpretation of the Bible is more accurate than the people who assembled the book.
Yeah.
That's the thing about the magisterium that people kind of give up on. They're like, well, the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church is all this dogma. It's like those are things that are handed down by tradition from the people who assembled the document which you're reading. It's not like, it's not something that someone came up with in the 15th century. These are very old traditions that go with this stuff. So you'd think that the Catholic Church, the Church of Humanae Vitae, would believe that you ought to be having children, or it's good to have children, and there's nothing wrong with having children. It's like every theologian in the Catholic Church is wrong because I interpret this Bible verse this way. That's kind of witchcraft. That's kind of like a witch line there.
Yeah, it is.
It's
and
things that the atheists do. They pull a Bible verse out of context and they're like, this is what this means. Therefore, do what I want. It's like,
yes. Well, let us hear no more of the contention that the church, which recognizes herself as the bride of Christ, the universal bridegroom, is somehow against marriage or denigrates marriage.
Mm-hmm. Now, Bradford just brings something up here that I just want to address real quick. Creators like David, Brian, myself should take the time to decide what becomes of our IP after we die so our heirs don't let it go the way of Star Wars. We should be so lucky to have a Christopher Tolkien, someone who loved his father enough and his father's work enough to preserve it for the most part and really take care of it. I would consider putting my IP into the public domain if it was popular, which just basically means that anyone can make adaptations of it. Because it's that makes it clear that the only canon is what I say it is. It's mine. There's what I created, and then there's what the fans made. And there's just a line between those that's just different, and doesn't mean you can't make great stuff that's based on someone else's IP. It just means mine's the official one. That's all. And so now let's get to having fun.
Yeah,
have fun, because I want to spend more time. I'm inverting my own rule here, and I've spent like 3/4 of the time kind of being negative. Let's have fun. How do we have fun doing this?
Well, we make our own stuff, and I believe you've said this. We be better than the enemy, and not the conservative sense of raising our noses and not dirtying our hands, but no, by rolling up our sleeves and going to work in the word mines. So I write about giant robots hitting each other in space with laser swords. What is you write about?
Yeah. Oh, I have all kinds of stories. What's the newest one? Well, the newest one's a horror story, but you might have fun with it. Hopefully you can actually get almost the entire audiobook for free on YouTube now. Everything but the last chapter. People were getting really shocked with the chapter I put out yesterday, which basically ripped a different mask off. And people were like, what? It's completely different from what I thought it was. Eyes in the Walls. So you can pick that one up. I think it's just $2.99. I'm really proud of this horror tale. I did something very unique that you're not going to read in a lot of horror tales. And this is a Christian horror book. And I know that sounds impossible, but read it and you'll know what I'm talking about. I can't write things that aren't from a Christian perspective because I'm a Christian. So I just didn't even try. And so there's religious stuff in here that's important to me, and I think adds weight to the story. And I've had some atheists review it and say it didn't get in the way of the story, that it was just part of the world of the story. And so, I think anyone would enjoy it, but particularly if you're looking for something that actually has the religiousness is part of the defense against evil. That's part of that one. What's another one? Well, that's the newest book. You can make your own fighting giant robots. I'll teach you how to make a good process. Keys to Prolific Creativity. Now available on audiobook from Amazon, or you can listen to some of the audiobook here on YouTube. I go through a lot of stuff in this book, guys. This is, I cut out a bunch of fat. It's actually not a thick book, but it's basically how you organize your life to be productive, how you organize your time to be productive, how you organize your priorities in order to get art done, and how you face your art so that you're able to complete your projects on time, under budget, high quality, and be able to then produce the next product. So how to manage the micro level, which is working every day. Talk about some ways to manage to get your work done every day, which I do. I am writing every day, or at the very least editing every day. If I'm focusing on editing a book, I'm editing every day, or writing. I'm working on something every day. Then I'm completing projects. That's the macro level. I'm finishing books. And then the meta level, I'm figuring out what books to do in what order and when, and how I'm going to manage my YouTube channel and stuff in order to have a career. And all that stuff is in the book.
Yep. And also shout out to Bradford Walker, who just gave us a super chat, where he is also writing books about giant robots in space, but a different kind of giant robots, more chivalrous giant robots. So yeah, you get in there, you get off the bench, you get in the game, and you make the kind of stuff you want to see. So instead of sitting around saying, man, I miss Star Wars, I miss kicking back like on the 4th of July at my uncle's house at our annual barbecue, and with the Empire Strikes Back playing on the USA Network in the background. instead of getting caught up in that Gen Y nostalgia trap, well, go out and think about, okay, what are the things you like about The Empire Strikes Back? What are the things you like about Terminator? What are the things you like about Warhammer 40K? And go use your skill, write a book about it, compose a concept album about it, draw a comic book about it. And it has never been easier to reach an audience than right now. So there are always challenges. There are challenges imposed on us by the death cult, but there are also a lot of opportunities too.
Yeah, I think so too. And there's opportunities to, you can be the change in a bunch of different ways. Everybody can do something. So if you're just average Joe and you're a consumer and you just want to have good art, find people that make cool stuff that you like and buy it. There's more alternatives now than ever. There's so many options that you can pursue. It's just unbelievable. You wouldn't have these options 30 years ago for sure. That's one way. The other way is you can review. You can review things which you think deserve attention, time. You can review the things to help other people find the things that they want to read, which are good, which support your side and avoid these kind of destructive groups of people that have taken control of these big corporations that hold IPs. So you can review things. And the third way is you can create things. You could be a creator. Maybe not everyone has the capacity to be a creative, and that's okay. You can be creative in your own way by, say, writing a review, or just by maybe you just want to have like a discussion group that talks about cool sci-fi novels, doesn't really review them. That's creative as well. Everybody has different creative potential for things, and you can exercise that in a whole bunch of different ways. If you want to write books, give it a shot. There's nothing really to lose except your time, and you probably would still get a lot of growth out of writing a book, even if you decided it wasn't something you wanted to pursue as a career.
Yeah,
it's a
you're
big
gonna learn a lot.
It's like running a marathon.
Yeah.
Learning to run a marathon. It's like, but if why would I want to learn to run a marathon if I'm not going to win the race? It's like, because you grow a lot by learning to run a marathon. It's good for you to do that. Connection lost, $2. The Exorcist is a Christian novel, IMO. I think The Exorcist does come from a Christian perspective. It is about spiritual warfare. And I don't think that you would make a movie I'm thinking of the movie here, but I don't think you would make a movie like that now.
Yeah.
Even though it's horrifying as it was.
Yeah, the author, William Peter Blatty, graduate of Georgetown, lifelong Catholic. He definitely did write it from a spiritual Christian perspective. And he got into... He got at loggerheads with the director over that because he wanted the movie to show more of the authentic spiritual warfare dimension. It's all based on a true story. The 1944 possession of Arnold Hugler from Cottage City, Maryland, who was given a Ouija board by his aunt at the age of 14, and a horror ensued.
And invited a demon in.
Yeah, so I definitely agree. Yeah, the Exorcist is a Christian novel. It's a Catholic work.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. And I think if you like The Exorcist, you'd probably like this one anyway. Eyes in the Walls. This is it's a classic monster story, but with some definite twists. So if you check it out, this kid is haunted by this monster he thinks lives in the morgue. His mom owns and runs a funeral home, and his parents are divorced. And so it deals with a lot of stuff that's very, very relevant if you're Gen Y or millennial. That means if you were born, say, after about 1975 and you experienced failing institutions. Brian and I have talked about this in prior shows. You've experienced failing institutions like divorces, schools failing you, having to sit in daycare, that kind of stuff. This all has relevant stuff in there for that generation in particular. But there's a spiritual warfare dimension because of multiple things that are going on, because it's like, how could this monster exist? And so one of the things that they really go for, and it gets more spiritual as you go deeper in the book, is it goes towards the idea that maybe it's a demon. Are they fighting a demon? Is this what's living in the morgue? Are they having to deal with a real demon? Of course, the adults don't really believe them because they're agnostic. They're unbelievers. And so they can't really face the realities, the horrors of what the kids know to be true. Yeah, Exorcist today would be a dumpster fire where the demon turning the girl trans species is not the bad guy. Yeah, it'd be something like that. Like I saw this awful movie Stigmata. Did you ever see that, Brian?
Yeah,
It was
sadly.
years now at this point, and it was like it's such a great example of like where I knew Hollywood was and where it was going. It was like it's such half baked understanding of everything in the Catholic Church or just Christianity in general. The numbers of Christians that I saw were like, this was a good movie. I'm like, you're insane. This is blasphemy, you know? And not in like a normal horror kind of goofy way. Like this is intentionally, they misrepresented this or had no idea what they were talking about. This idea that a dead priest was possessing her body is, I mean, I can't think of another word for it. Can you?
No, I mean, that's
blasphemous.
Blasphemous.
Yeah.
I will say though that
our souls do not linger around to possess other people.
it's a misunderstanding of probably partially out of ignorance and partially out of malice of pneumatology and angelology. But yeah, I will say though that Exorcist 3 is one exception to the don't watch any Roman numerals after 2 rule, because Blatty himself wrote and directed it.
Mm-hmm. There's also, you know, Star Trek movies that are good. Star Trek 3 is okay. Star Trek 4 is tolerable. It's funny. Star Trek 5 is actually underrated, but you know, there's definitely Star Trek movies that break that rule, and James Bond movies too. Although they're not numeralized, I guess. So probably the rule will probably stick for James Bond, I guess.
I'll give it that.
But you know, the point is that once that milking phase begins, usually you have a big quality decline that happens. Not always, but usually. Somebody asked if Water of Awakening was a pagan book. It's not pagan. Of course, it exists in a fantasy realm where Christ doesn't exist. So it's going to have their religion that's associated with it. So it does have an artificial religion in it. But, you know, there's Christian themes in it. You just have to dig with them. Basically a competition against a kind of Gnosticism that exists as well. Same thing in Needle Ash. And what people think of as Gnosticism really has to do with this nature of creation and subcreation. I have a whole mythology and cosmology that goes with it, but I prefer to do it indirectly because I think it's more fun to just focus on the story. They're great yarns, though. You'll like them. It's a big adventure. You want a big adventure to the edges of the Fae where reality no longer follows the rules, and you'll see the consequences of that if you read that book. I'm very proud of that book. I had a lot of fun reading it.
Outstanding.
All right. Here's some other things about when I want to reiterate this about having fun. The more time that you spend brewing and ruminating on something that upsets you, the more attention you're giving of yourself, even on an individual level, to people who hate you. You're making yourself miserable if you're focusing on how much Star Wars sucks. And I know that I've done a lot of content on how much Star Wars sucks. And a part of it is because people want me to do that content. And I also think I can reach people with that content. I promise you, I spend almost no time actually thinking about Star Wars outside the context of discussions people want to have with me about Star Wars. So if you're sitting there spending all of your time stewing on how bad Last of Us 2 is or something like that, you're wasting your time. Instead, spend your time playing a game that's fun. There's a lot of fun games. Someone mentioned Dragon's Dogma. I haven't played it. I have it. I believe I have it. I've had so many people say I should play it, so that's definitely on the list there. Spend your time doing things that are fun. And if there's no current game that interests you, guess what? There are thousands of classic games that you can read. Same thing with books. If you just can't seem to find something in sci-fi that interests you, well, damn it, you can read Barsoom books. They're great. You can read any of the classic sci-fi books. You could read the Dune series. If you've never read Dune, you could read Dune. It's great. There are a lot of great classic books out there you can read.
There's a treasure trove. There's a dragon hoard of this rich cultural patrimony that the Death Cult has tried to steal from us, but it's at your fingertips. I mean, go to archive.org. They've got more free public domain, classic pulp adventure books and classic movies that you could watch in a lifetime if you read and watched one every day. LibriVox has free audiobooks. Visit secondhand bookshops and pick up books used, pick up used games, pick up abandonware.
Yeah, so here's a couple ways that you can avoid giving money to people who hate you. Number one, and Brian just mentioned one, buy things secondhand. So rather than buying that new printing of the Thrawn trilogy, you can just buy a used copy. Now, you're not helping out. I mean, you're not helping out the author there, but you can avoid giving money to people who hate you by buying used and out of print things. That's one way that. Now you're still giving them a little bit of attention, maybe, but you're not giving them money, and you're still able to find the things that you want there. So that's one way that you can do it. Besides just finding new products that you like, there's a lot of stuff that you can buy. There's a lot of alternatives. So that is a good one. You can actually buy used things. I think, if you have a problem, like let's say you don't like Naughty Dog, which one did they make? Like Jack and Daxter? I think they originally made that one, right? You can pick up a copy of Jack and Daxter on eBay for like $10. Just pop it in your PS3 and have fun. There's no reason to keep buying like remastered versions of everything if you don't want to.
Yeah. Just seek out alternatives. And I understand, guys, it's hard to get out of your preferred sales channels, right? Habits are hard to break, but the rewards of doing so are great. Because I mean, right now I got people like David Bradford, me, Raul, John Delarose, Nicole Donspach, putting out stuff that just beats the pants off of the dreary propagandist dreck that Old Pub is putting out. And yeah, unfortunately, because the system's kind of rigged against us, you have to do a little digging to find them. But there's gold in them thar hills. Bring a bushel basket, not a strainer. Okay. I mean,
and this is one problem that lots of us on our side of things are trying to solve this year, which is the filtering necessary to help consumers find the products that they like. Because Amazon, it's actually very difficult sometimes to filter down to something that's really just for you. And there's lots of different methods of filters, YouTube videos about books. But there's lots of us working on how to solve that problem so that people can much more easily find the things which they really are going to love, that they're really going to have a great time with. One of my rules for reviews, this is something that we haven't talked about today yet, but put that out as a big memo. Actually, I'll link it in case anyone wants to read this. This is really directed towards other authors, I think, to a pretty big degree, but it would apply to anybody. Just on reviews in the indie movement, so you can give that a look. One of my prescriptions for reviews is number one is read what you love. Read books from the authors you want to succeed and whose work you enjoyed. Don't force yourself to read anything. If you are forcing yourself to read something, that's a waste of your time. There's too many other books from good authors that deserve attention that you can do. So if one of my books isn't doing it for you, that's okay. Put it down and read something else and move on. Who cares? That's not going to hurt my feelings that my book didn't do it for you. There's going to be something out there that's going to be just what you want. Hopefully. In fact, not even hopefully, for sure. It's like a numerical certainty really at this point. Yeah. So that's number one. Read books you love. Any thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, I read through your excellent article earlier today. I couldn't agree more. One thing we need to start thinking about doing is how to strategize, how to sort of build this support base, because the other side guys, they come out for their people, right? Whenever N.K. Jemisin or John Scalzi releases a new book, everybody from io9totor.com is out there hustling and pushing it. And we've had these sporadic kind of movements that sort of coalesce around an issue, but then break up due to internal differences. But we need more solidarity. We need
to operate as a group. We tend to be very individualistic on the right. We tend to be these libertarian types that are like, keep it off my lawn. Let me do what I want to do. Let me pursue what I want to pursue. And yes, that's good for the most part, but voluntary voluntary cooperation is still voluntary, you voluntarists, which I really, for the most part, I'm a voluntarist, but like I'm really a minarchist. But so voluntarily choosing to further your aims is not bad. We tend to be a little too unwilling to help others or work as a group on the right. It's a weakness. The left, they have no problem. All the newspapers will coordinate their attacks on whoever they want to attack for the week, whether it's Nick Sandmann or it's going to be Donald Trump or whatever figure they're going to attack. They all coordinate. They call each other up. They say, we're all going to write the article, and they do it. We need a little bit more coordination to break through that noise, because they give zero attention to anything that is not in the mainstream. Zero attention.
Yeah, like it doesn't exist. They don't give attention to people who hate them, and they know that money is attention. Attention is money.
Mm-hmm. Fantasy Fan has a point. This burnout occurred with me in Star Wars Expanding Universe, ironically, towards the end of the Lucas years. That's because that was part of that milking phase. The EU was kind of part of that dormancy, where we had a lot of Star Wars products, but none of them were movies. And I don't dislike George Lucas. I mean, he was running a business, but it's not quite the same as if he'd been banging out like 6 awesome movies in a row. He didn't do that. Anyway, I just thought I'd point that out.
Did we miss a super chat there?
I don't know if we did. I can actually, give me a minute, and I think I can actually look up all of the super chats on my channel. See if I missed one. Sometimes I do, because it takes a long time to discuss something. But let me take a look here. See, it used to be easy to find, but like you used to have all the super chats in one little tab. It's harder to find now for some reason. Supers. All right, here's a super chat history. Let me see if I missed any. Exorcist is Christian. St. Paul, paraphrasing Tolkien. Cloud. Establish an air. A lot of super chats today. I really appreciate it. Education's the next fight. Gene Senny purchased Brian's book. Thank you for that. Companies are doing it for control. I think we got them all.
All right, good. Just making sure. I thought I saw one slip past. I'm all about making sure the customers get what they pay for.
Yeah. And I'm really sorry if I ever miss a super chat or I get to it later. Here's one from the other day. Just turned in my last assignment from Zachary Hockett. I just want to read this again for his BSN degree. Just wanted to share with people and give David a tip. Have a good Saturday, everyone. And I read that one out loud. It was like at the end of the stream, but that's good. We should celebrate accomplishments. If you feel like you've accomplished something. And if you choose to write a book, that's a big accomplishment. Or record an album. There's so much art to be produced, and we don't just celebrate people able to complete those projects enough. We're so consumer focused, and I've noticed this, like, because I have heaps of, say, Facebook friends that don't even know I write books. They don't know what I'm doing, and they don't really care because they haven't heard about me through some media thing. There's like, David can't be a good writer because I know David. How could that be? How could he be successful? I tend to only celebrate big, like, financial successes, but it's not about the money. It's not about the money to the left. It doesn't need to be about the money, just the money to the right. That's where you should start if you're thinking about writing a book. Start with what you're passionate about. Have that passion, because that's what's going to get you through the project. Work on what you love.
Yeah, I've seen something in the chat that I think makes a good springboard for a discussion here. There's this idea that, we have the meme magic, unlike the Death Cult. We can meme, right? So we just meme our way to victory, and the memes are helpful. But don't you think at some point, David, we need to get some institutional power and some organization?
Mm-hmm. It's not just that. It's not just institutional power and organization. Memes point to things which are established. So making stories, for instance, are part of that establishment. Controlling the general culture is part of that establishment of ideas. The reason the left can't meme is because they're basically trying to operate a theological thesis in every meme, because they're not pointing to the truth. Memes just say what's true. That's why they work. Whereas if you're trying to avoid the truth, it becomes increasingly more complicated to do so. That's really why the left can't meme. And I have a funny story. As a former friend of mine, found that one of her images was being used on a meme. A picture of her was being used. So she started making her own memes, and it's a perfect example. Like, it was a picture of her face, and there's just like text, like, all the way surrounding her. It's like, I'm gonna make my own memes and out meme these guys. It's like, dude, you can't meme because you're trying to give a thesis on imaginary morals that aren't true. It makes no sense. So that's really why the left can't meme, is that they're pointing to a complex artificial semiology rather than just the truth. Memes, the right-wing memes are like, laugh my ass off, bottom text. You don't even need the bottom text because we could just have one word at the top and it makes sense.
Society.
So memes are helpful, but they're not uber powerful. They're great for communicating, and that's why there's been some attempts to stifle memes, to like say that you can't post copyrighted memes or something like that. Can't post copyrighted content. It's like, memes we need to be able to post memes. We need to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's kind of my point, is that, the memes are effective. That's why there's this crackdown where eventually, like with the 2 laws the EU passed last year. And so the crackdowns here, they're just going to ban them. They're going to ban us. I'll be left like Xeroxing memes in the library and handing them out of the on the bus station, or going door to door, or like mailing them from a PO box.
Yeah, they banish us from the virtual society. Society and culture to a large extent is virtualized, and so if they ban you from the virtual society, you lose a lot of power.
Yeah.
So banishment exists, and it does work. They will repeatedly tell you how much deplatforming works. That's why they work so hard to kick everybody off of Twitter, because they know that Twitter works. That's why they're trying to deplatform the president of the United States of America, because as long as he has a Twitter account, he has direct access to everybody, and he can just say what needs to be said instead of having to have it filtered through the media into some article that the articles continue to misrepresent him no matter what. It's not it's almost hilarious at this point. I think anybody who picks up a New York Times article and thinks that they're getting something pointing to objective truth it's got to have something clinical going on at this point. I mean, it's so obvious, but I don't know. People are brainwashed, maybe. This is a good one. Brian's an editor too, by the way, guys. If you've never had Brian on the show, I've been on a show with Brian before. Brian's an editor, good sci-fi editor. I've never had him edit my books, but I hear from people who have that he's a great editor. He's been the editor for a lot of popular books that I know of and that are good books. So he could probably answer this question too. Are there themes or plot structures that help one identify whether a story points to the truth or not? This is an interesting one.
That's something that's definitely going to come through. Did you want to take this first?
Yeah, I have. Well, I'll give you an example with this Naughty Dog one, this Last of Us 2. So if a plot renders itself impotent, then it's not pointing to the truth. In other words, if you have a plot that the resolution of it is meaninglessness, then it can't point to truth, because meaninglessness is not truth, right? Nihilism points at nothing. That's why it's nothing. So it can't be true if it has a nihilistic outcome. It has to have some sort of outcome that has meaning for it to be true. This is something that you notice with death cultist stuff, is that there's no meaning behind it. They write a whole story about how nothing matters and it's all pointless. What's the point of writing the story then? There isn't any. It's not. Yeah. It's completely ridiculous exercise. Any thoughts, Brian, before we get to the super chat?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of plot structure, I'm thinking of one horror plot in particular that I hate and just immediately makes me right off the movie. And that is, if the conclusion of your movie is indistinguishable from every character putting a gun to his temple in the first act and pulling the trigger, you have failed and your plot does not point toward truth. Mm-hmm. And film adaptation of The Mist and The Krampus, I'm looking at you.
So I'll let me give you an example. You can have every character die. If you watch a movie like The 300, all the main characters basically die except for one. Is the outcome the same though as if they had all killed themselves at the beginning? The answer is absolutely not. that they died for a reason. They died for a cause. They sacrificed themselves for the greater good. And the result was it gave the rest of their countrymen enough time to organize the resistance to the Persians and achieve victory, that their sacrifice had ultimate meaning. So every character can die in a story, but is the outcome the same? Like what you said, the answer is with 300, it's not. And that's how you know it's different. Just because people are dying does not mean that it's nihilistic.
Even Hamlet passes the test, even though all the main characters die, because the story is a meditation on death.
Yeah, and the meaning of life.
Yeah, exactly. Hamlet points to life. Yeah.
That's interesting. I'd have to do some more thinking about Hamlet too. I haven't looked at it in a long time. So yeah, that's one of the tests. I think if the end result is something that points to meaninglessness, then you're looking at kind of death cultist propaganda. They want you to be demoralized. They want you to think that what you're doing doesn't matter. This is part of. They don't just want you to die. They want everything to die. Your culture, your grandfather sacrificed his life in World War II so that you could have your present now. If you don't continue that forward, then his sacrifice has basically been reduced to nothing. And that's really what they want. It's an undoing of the past too, because all you have to do to undo the past is destroy the future. Then the past isn't remembered by anybody. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's Megadeth. Anyway, let's get to this super chat. Gent, since China owns much of the movie business, how much weight do you give to the theory that they have a lot to do with the pushing of this propaganda? That's a very interesting question. I don't know how well I can answer it.
I don't think much, because if you look at how these death cultist productions, like the Star Wars sequels, are performing in China, the Chinese aren't really all about this. Now, you could all counter that with the theory that, oh, well, it's degeneracy for thee, but not for me. So China's purposefully pushing this stuff in order to weaken us for some kind of takeover. I invoke Occam's razor, invoke no entities beyond that which is strictly necessary to explain the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about this. China is going to be the largest Christian country on earth by 2050. They're actually not a place where the death cult is ascendant. The West is where the death cult is taking root and trying to spread outward, and China's actually resisting that. Right? Like they're not allowing certain movies in, or they're requiring cuts to certain movies. So
yeah, I think they cut the kiss out of Rise of Skywalker. I think this is just a great example, because JJ threw in two girls kissing in the background to say like, hey, we're like woke and stuff, and China's like, nope, just cut that, make it easy to cut.
Yeah, I think Bradford just nailed it in his super chat here.
Chi-Coms actually don't hold the pause, as it contravenes their own dogma. Chi-Coms running the business means entirely different tropes get normed. Now, here's the other thing too. Now I want to make a point, which is that just because the money is controlling something doesn't mean that money converts into messaging. In other words, you message against the ownership, because there's lots of people who own Sony Pictures. It's a publicly traded company, so you can own stock in it, which means you own it. But the will of the stockholders doesn't get filtered down into movies very efficiently. If let's say you want to take control, and Box Day talks about this in his book Corporate Cancer, which is a book I've reviewed on the channel, and it's a very short book, but it's very insightful as to how this stuff works. Is that you don't have to have ownership of a company to control it, and in fact, you can work against the ownership of the company, not by owning it, but by just having people work in it. So all the lefties go and want to work in the movie industry because they want to make a difference. Remember, they have that moral imperative. They do these things for moral reasons. They're like, I want to put out the stories which are morally correct, which are my side. That's why they get into the business. It's really not about the money. So all they really have to do is to get into the corporation, and then they take control of the machine work of the corporation and make it start doing the things that they want it to do. Now, Vox's point with Corporate Cancer is that it's cancer. It will kill the patient. This is like, how do we burn the fire out? It's like it burns itself out eventually because you run out of money. Or at some point, that which can't continue, I guess, won't continue. But all it really takes is certain people to take control. And the way the cancer spreads is it starts usually in the human resources department, and then it spreads from there because you gain control of the human resources department so you can hire the right kind of people in your company. The human resources department is the one that makes you do all the sexual harassment training and all that kind of stuff. Human resource tends to be the infection vector. That's how the corporate cancer gets in. And then it spreads out to all the other tissues by, okay, well, we'll hire a creative director that's in line with our ideology. You hire a feminist creative director and you even put it out there. We're hiring women. We're having women directors. How often do you see this kind of crap? We're going to have women directors. It's going to be an all-female cast. They're signaling that they are morally doing what's right. That's part of their creed, like what Brian says. And so all they have to do is take control of a couple key positions, take control of the creative positions, and then they can start pumping out the movies they want to pump. And it doesn't matter if China owns them. In order for China to do something about it, it has to leverage their shares with other shares, because I don't think they own a majority. It has to leverage enough shares to change who's on the board of directors to then fire enough people to make a change in corporate. Usually that doesn't happen. That's actually very inefficient. So probably what happens is the corporation loses money hand over fist, and the whoever owns the company starts to do a corporate raid on it, starts to chop it up and sell off the parts. You start selling off the IPs for money. That's what's going to end up happening to some of these media companies. It's already happened. Fox got sold to Disney, didn't it? I think Disney bought Fox, the pictures part. That's because of the greater News Corp machinery being broken up, basically. Saying, well, this Fox Pictures over here, it's losing a lot of money. So rather than clean house and replace everybody, they just sold and they just exited. Rupert Murdoch was like, we're just getting out of this business. We're getting out of the movie business because it's less effort than trying to fire everybody and hire people who actually want to make money. In other ways, I think Fox News may have been more infested than Disney. Our focus is on Disney because Disney has had the more valuable IPs, but I think it's actually kind of late coming to the corporate cancer stage. It's definitely there. It has corporate cancer, but I think it's later coming than Fox and probably Universal as well.
Yeah. And that speaks of another opportunity for us because the movie business is taking a bath right now due to Corona-chan. I mean, Disney's live action Mulan remake, which I believe did not get a showing in China, tanked. I mean, it cost them tens of millions of dollars. So the studios, the big New York publishers, comic book publishers, they're in dire straits right now.
Yeah, if it weren't for getting owned by Disney, Marvel would have been shuttered long ago, or it would have had what I've talked about. It would have its pieces broken up and auctioned off in a bankruptcy court. If it declared bankruptcy and it was time for liquidization of assets, that franchise is an asset. Spider-Man is an asset, and someone else, DC Comics, could have bought Spider-Man. And that's what would end up happening with those. They'd end up in other corporations. And then the talent wouldn't be attached to them. And because the patient's dead, the corporation's dead at that point.
Yep. That is disco.
Here we go. Regarding not giving money to those who hate you, if a consumer is a Jewish conservative and an art creator is right-wing but anti-Semitic, like Vox Day, rule number one is read the stuff you want to read that's from the creators you like. If you don't like Vox Day, you don't have to read his books. I mean, he says his nonfiction books say a lot of things which I think are important to read. I don't consider him an anti-Semite, but I'm not going to speak on his behalf for whatever particular beliefs he happens to have, nor would he care that somebody is calling him an anti-Semite. One of his points is like, everybody's so afraid of being called names, they won't just say what they think. He's okay being called whatever mean names you call him. Again, I don't want to speak for him, but he seems pretty okay with people calling him racist all the time. So you don't have to. If you think that you're supporting the wrong person by buying Vox Day's books, absolutely, I'm not asking you to buy Vox Day's books. It's up to you what you want to buy. And certainly you shouldn't read stuff that you don't think is interesting, because there's other stuff that's good from other good people that you like. Anything to say there, Brian?
I think you covered it.
Okay.
What is allowable is not mandatory.
Yeah, it's voluntary.
Okay. We're talking about not.
Yeah.
Yeah. The context here is not supporting the Hollywood and New York death cult machine that is pumping out anti-Christian propaganda, because America is a Christian nation. So,
yeah, I'm talking about voluntary stuff.
Whatever you want.
If you're Jewish, that's support what supports your side. That's still probably not going to be the death cult side. Most of the Jews that I'm friends with are not death cultists, certainly. They have their own religion, their own culture, but that's not bad. Other religions and other cultures are not bad simply because I'm promoting my religion and culture. This is something that I think a lot of the people on the left want to conflate. Is if I say this culture is good, that means other cultures are bad. No, I think Japanese culture is fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not my culture, right? So I want to preserve my culture, and I want my culture to be good and to serve the people that's in it, and to have good values, and be a peaceful place for the people who live in it.
And to clarify my point, the death cult is primarily aiming their attacks at Christendom. They hate the Christ, right? You can get an insight into what your enemy motive is by what they hate. So that's why I'm restricting the context to a Christian one, because it's Christian morality that the death cult is warping into a tool to bludgeon middle America, and it is the Christian faith, of which they are a mutant offshoot, that they hate and want to destroy. So when it comes to other reasons that certain creators might take issue with other creators, well, yeah, man, I mean, looking out for your own team and advancing your own self-interests as you see them can be a healthy, and it's a natural pursuit. Okay, so if middle America, if heritage American culture would do that, this problem would be solved overnight. So that's really the gist of the message: is don't fund your enemies. It's okay to have your own self-interest and to act for your self-interest in the interest of your family.
Yeah. Yeah, it's easier to apply negative than a positive. And the negative would be like, don't give money to people that hate you. Now, we can start to decide on more things we want to collectively do that are positive. Like maybe we're all going to read, and maybe me and Brian and a bunch of others, we're all going to coordinate our reviews of a certain book because we want it to get exposure, we think it's important, or we just want someone to have success. That coordination is positive and voluntary. If I didn't like the book, I would simply not write a review of it. No big deal, right? There's nothing involuntary at all that I'm proposing here at all, or that anyone should feel bad by not conforming. It's really just like people are so used to being nonconformists that they refuse to work together sometimes for things that they should. Oops, I skipped the one. How did Harry Potter become such a success? Well, the author seems to be such a death cultist. Now, I have some thoughts. I don't know if Brian has any thoughts.
Well, she was kind of a stealth.
JD has an answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Here's JD's answer. Rowling is hated by them now. She pushed too far. She refused to bend the knee on something that was, I don't remember what it was. I don't know. I think it was some trans issue or something. She refused to bend the knee on that, and therefore she got excommunicated.
Yeah, Rowling strikes me as, you're pretty run-of-the-mill. I don't want to say Karen here, but just an ordinary person who was kind of brought up in like that post-Christian secularist milieu, who had no particular antipathy and even some sympathies toward Christianity, but just by signing the standard rich and famous contract, she sold away a bit of her soul. And so now her livelihood depends on towing the death cult line because they run old pub. So for what I recall, I don't pay too much attention to her, but her burnings of incense to the death cult came about gradually.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed to have been them pushing her to make these public confessions.
Yep. So, right, Rowling is trying to add things that were not within the concrete text. So that's really the sign, is that she wrote the books before she got kind of pushed in, before they started demanding confessions of faith from her. So she just wrote books as from a normal person. And here's the thing about the Harry Potter books. No one expected them to blow up. This is the thing that I talk about with black swans, positive black swans. It's something that I've studied a lot in literature. The mega successes, you just don't see them coming. Otherwise, you would have had a bunch of people writing books just like Harry Potter at the same time. It wasn't a design success. You actually can't design success on this level. You can design success on a modest level, somewhere in mediocre stand, but not an extremist stand, not making it like the most popular book that's ever written. No one saw that coming. She was just a normal person. And it's only after she started getting famous that people started demanding this proclamation of faith, which she eventually failed because she refused to say something of the correct things for she did not recite the correct liturgy for trans people at some point, and therefore she got excommunicated from the church, and now she's the same as the rest of us. And so she might as well stop trying to say Dumbledore was gay and just go back. Dumbledore was just an old man. He wasn't that sexual. Okay, old men aren't going out trying to get laid all the time. He's just an old man.
Yeah, I mean, you had the real point there, which is no one knows how Harry Potter became so successful. So it's impossible to say why it became successful despite her being a death cultist, because if we knew how exactly why Harry Potter became successful, we'd all
we'd be doing that.
Yeah.
I'd be doing that right now. You think I'd be sitting here talking to Brian? I'd be like, Brian, I'm busy making $1 billion here. Go away.
I'd be relaxing on a tropical island right
now. When you rise too high, you cash out or soul out. Now that's interesting. Ooh. So this kind of thing can happen where when you get success is kind of addictive. Attention can be really addictive. And I know because I run a YouTube channel, I know that we're social beings and we kind of thrive on attention. I want people to pay attention to me. Of course, that's a normal human thing. It's like, I want people to pay attention to me. But fame on like those extreme levels, it becomes addictive. So you start doing anything to get people to pay attention to you. That's why I think a lot of famous people start acting crazy. You don't want to fall out of the limelight and become nobody. But at the same time, there's people who go up that high and then they make a moral decision about something and then they just disappear. Like people were like, where did Rick Moranis go for 20 years? I never heard a single story about Rick Moranis until like he started working again. It's like, well, what happened to this guy? Well, what had happened was his wife died, and rather than put his kids in daycare or something, he became a stay-at-home dad and raised his children for 20 years by himself.
Yeah. And I think he'd occasionally take like
a bit
a
role
gig
or something.
teaching. He was like teaching acting at some Canadian university.
Yeah, like at night or something. Yeah, you're right. So he just checked out of that and did what he thought was right. And that's what happened. I think I can't think of too many examples off the top of my head of people that really got up to a high level and basically like refused to go further because it would have been bad for their soul. A lot of people, I don't know, there's a lot of examples of guys who kind of cashed out of that, but I can't think of
the New Radicals.
My head.
The New Radicals, right?
The New Radicals.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure that guy made like one hit album with that song. I think "Don't Give Up," something like that. Then he's like, "Okay, I'm done. That I achieved what I wanted to achieve," and he just retired from music.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's more like that. I know there's some. I know I had a friend who used to believe every band should make like 2 albums and then like break up because that's like when they're going to have their best creative output, and then after that they're just trying to milk it. They're in the milking phase.
Oh, I got a funny story pertaining to that. That you may have seen this on Twitter. So I was having a discussion with one of my mutuals, right? Because I just on a lark I posted, okay, here are like the 3 bands that would have changed the rock landscape if, fate hadn't intervened. And one of them I listed was Jesus Jones, because I'm a huge Jesus Jones fan. I think their second album is even better than the more popular one, right? And I have a buddy, reminds me a lot of you. Like, he just knows music inside out. He's been a musician since before he could crawl. And he's actually worked in the industry a bit. And I remember during this gig that he and I were playing in 2000, he told me he'd watched a documentary on Jesus Jones and said, yeah, they were on the way up. They were going to get to the A+ list, but they were derailed by their lead singer and songwriter's drinking problem. I went, oh, that's horrible. So I was talking about this with one of my mutuals who said, yeah, I thought the thing with Jesus Jones was they just produced a series of albums that didn't connect with people. And I was like, no, like I have an insider tip that, their lead singer was a lush. And then Jesus Jones actually, like their official Twitter account, broke into the conversation and said, no, we just released a couple bombs in a row. Thanks for thinking we were good enough to change the rock landscape, though. Like, oh, touche.
Yeah, I'm trying to rack my brain for examples that kind of fit that. A lot of bands. I don't know. Yeah, I'm trying to think of anybody that went up to the top and like turned around and just became a normal person after that. I can't think of too many off the top of my head, and that's probably why they kind of exit your consciousness. You end up forgetting about them to a certain extent. They quit the music business and disappear for a while, or just go away, become like normal people again. I can't think of too many, but it's true. I mean, like I think it gets addictive, and of course, if you're in part of that corporate, especially the music business, is very dirty. They're going to ask a lot of your soul. They're going to ask you to do a lot of things that you don't want to do. I think it gets worse now, especially women. You get girls like having to be increasingly sexual to gain attention in the music landscape. It's just very dystopian to me now.
Yeah. Now I'm going to play devil's advocate a bit, because one problem I think we have on our side is, like, we actually do have, mainly among like these classical liberal and libertarian types, is we'll have an indie get an indie, like a Maverick in old publishing, get a lot of success and be like, okay, well, I've got my fan base, I've got my bestsellers, I'm building a ranch in Idaho somewhere or something, so I got mine. And then they disconnect from the rest of our scene and don't really provide that signal boost, don't provide that rallying point. There's that individualism again. So one thing that a good buddy of mine said to me was, great, heck, Galaxy's Edge. And I'm not accusing Nick and Jason of being aloof or anything. Nick in particular has helped me out a ton. He's a prince. And I think they are actually trying to go for this level, but it's like, yeah, what good does it really do us if Galaxy's Edge makes $1 million, but it's not a household name, right? We need our own Harry Potter, our own Star Wars, our own Batman, right? And again, I think Nick and Jason are close. They just haven't quite hit that level yet. What do you think?
I think it ties into this, this comment. Do you think restaurants and pubs that play Vox Day, PewDiePie, and both of your content, et cetera, on their television instead of sports and mainstream media could become popular mainstay? That's an interesting hypothetical. So what propels something into that stratospheric realm? I can't say for sure. I can't really say for sure. And I also know that there's time filtering that goes on too. And so it's easy to think that something is a big explosion that hasn't been time filtered through, like maybe Galaxy's Edge will be really well known 20 years from now. I'm not 100% sure, because different things gain popularity over time in different ways. Or even in 200 years, who knows what people will be talking about. It could be that like all the stuff that we talk about now is completely ignored in 150 years in favor of things that me and Brian wrote. Like maybe me and him are like the Bach of this time period. And like people will be analyzing our books in 150 years as like, these guys weren't considered great writers when they were alive until, but now we know that they were the best. They wrote all this literature on how to write books. It's like, okay, it could be something. Like that. Who knows? Because Bach was not considered the greatest composer when he was alive, but as time goes on, more and more gets filtered away until it's like, oh, what is great music? And the answer is just Bach. That becomes the answer over a long enough timeline, that the greatest music is Bach, because that's what it is. It's what everyone listens to generation after generation more than anything else.
It's really hard to build starting from heights like that.
Yeah, and you never know where it's going to go. So if that's where you're aiming, you're going to have a hard time. So this kind of ties into that. Like, part of Harry Potter's explosion, even though it wasn't anticipated, it's still facilitated by the normie corporate period media that existed. I don't know if we'll see another Harry Potter ever again, because media doesn't work the way that it worked when Harry Potter was like the last gasp of a gigantic monolithic corporate infrastructure that tons of attention could go to one thing, Harry Potter, and deliver it to people and continue to build that hype into a massive, overwhelming cultural phenomenon. And it's hard to say. So I don't know if they played all of my content in a bar. I'm trying to imagine a story. Like, let's say we go into a bar and it's got PewDiePie and Vox Day on it. And that's a weird pairing, but let's just go with it. Someone comes in and they're like, who the hell are those people? Can we watch the game? And the bartender says, no, we watch PewDiePie and Vox Day in this bar. And so the guy, does he leave, or does he sit down and watch PewDiePie and Vox Day? And so maybe he sits down and watches PewDiePie and Vox Day, and he's like, I don't like this Vox Day guy. He makes me feel bad. So maybe he leaves and doesn't go to that bar. Maybe it's a bar full of people who end up liking to watch PewDiePie and Vox Day, and like that's what they want to have on the TV for some reason. I don't know. Like, it would be really weird to even think that. If you were a pub owner and just did that, what would happen? Most people would either tune it out, I think, as noise, or they would get upset at it if it wasn't noise, or they pay attention to it, because those are the three things. I know that people with CNN don't usually get that upset about CNN being on, even if they hate it. They just tune it out like noise. CNN's on at the gym sometimes. Of course, now we're not going to the gym right now, but CNN's on at the gym sometimes. I don't watch it. No one watches it. It's just background noise. Maybe there's one guy there who watches it, but no one else really cares.
Yeah.
So I think it would be an interesting experiment, but I don't know why that would happen.
Yeah. It's kind of putting the cart before the horse, but the super chatter is kind of on the right track. I think Emperor filled in the missing pieces, which is our problem is resources. Like, it would be great if we had a billionaire who was backing us. Mm-hmm. I mean, that would really solve a lot of problems. That's kind of what we need.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't have access. We have access to all the channels, which are great possibilities. We don't have access to a lot of money to make something big like a movie. Movies are expensive. We need that corporate infrastructure to make movies. And I don't know what's going to happen. Like, this plague may just completely collapse the Hollywood system, and then we'll be picking up pieces afterwards. It's going to be interesting. I actually think Disney will survive. I think Disney will be the one to survive, because it can leverage a lot of, even though its books are probably pretty even on debt, it has a lot of debt, it's got a ton of assets that it can leverage for as much operating capital as it needs until this goes away, to figure out what it's going to be next.
It
does.
A
ton of smart people that work there, I think.
But again, devil's advocate, whenever he thinks of Disney as this too big to fail monolith, but they were almost taken out in the 80s, man. They came this close.
Yeah, after Black Cauldron. Black Cauldron almost killed them.
Yeah, Black Cauldron, and Something Wicked This Way Comes. They had 3 bombs in a row.
Honestly, I could say the same thing about Apple. Apple went from one of the biggest, best computer companies to on the verge of bankruptcy in 1996, selling shares for like $8 or $12 a share. Yeah, to the most valuable company on earth. Went from that low all the way out to that high. Who knows what's going to happen, really?
And it can turn on a dime again.
I think Disney has enough assets that it can survive as Disney, but whether it survives as a movie maker, I don't know. But you're right; nothing's too big to fail. There might be, but Disney's in a particularly bad position actually, because it not only has movies, it has theme parks. It's really a theme park company as much as it's a movie company, and with no one going to the theme parks, that's a whole lot of revenue you're missing. You're going to have to leverage a lot of operating expenses just to keep those ready to reopen. And maybe people won't go back to them.
Yeah. Maybe, and I agree. Disney isn't
I didn't miss it. I won't go back.
Yeah. As a brand, as a corporate entity, it'll be around in some form, but I don't think it's going to be Disney as we know it today.
I think it's going to be very interesting. I look very positively forward at the future. There is a lot of amazing things that can happen in the future. And one of the things too, and this is a Christian perspective, is that, iron sharpens iron. Adversity will only make you a person of better faith. God does not put adversity in our way because he's cruel or something. It refines us and makes us better. The challenges you overcome with your faith now are things which you don't have to correct before you can enter into his presence. So that's a positive. So even if it's a great struggle, that's still a positive, spiritual positive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what we need to remember is we've already won, right? Christ conquered on Calvary. So this is just the mop-up operation in enemy territory.
I love that. Yeah. Our mission here can never fail. It can't. It can't fail.
Nope.
It's a good point.
But again, it doesn't mean that we get complacent because God wants us to cooperate in our own salvation. So we're being asked to use the tools and gifts he's given us for his glory. Yeah. That's really the point of all this. I mean, one of the big dividing lines in our thing is between the Christian side and then maybe the low tax liberal side, right? Like even the guys who say, well, I want America, I want to go back. I want to go back to the 50s or the 60s or something. If you really only want to do it so that you have lower taxes and more personal freedom to indulge your personal preferences, you're really not on our team. You're really not that useful, because the whole purpose of a nation, of a civilization, is to consecrate that part of the world to God. Yeah, you got to get the why right.
Yeah, the why. That's a good perspective. Ron Leonzi says Shining Tomorrow film being made in 2120. Trippy. It could happen. They made a John Carter film not too long ago. You could make movies 100 years from now. That would be interesting. Determined Sheepy, $10. Throwing money wildly to people who don't hate me. I really appreciate that super chat. Thank you for that.
Oh, thanks.
Now, this is a good question. This is more shop talk, and we're kind of going over for time, so we should probably wrap it up soon. As a no-name author from Somalia, Thirst. I can't understand that name. It's too deep in lead speak for me. As a no-name author, should I go for self-publishing or go to traditional publishers who can reach more potential readers but market its subject matter as shallow or shocking? It's an interesting dichotomy there. It's a complex question. So the thing is, you can always try to go trad, and if that doesn't work, you can still go indie. You can always try to find an agent and go through that whole rigmarole. It's a lot of work to self-publish because you have to manage the business yourself, and that's a lot of work. But you own the entirety of your work. You can change it at any time you want. You can do whatever you want with it, and you get to keep all the money too. So there's a lot of advantages to self-publishing. It just depends kind of who you are. Now, I think with what's going on right now, and I kind of want Brian's input on this because he always has a little bit better line on publishing. Trad publishing, I think, is in worse trouble now maybe than I really thought it was going to be 5 months ago even.
They're screwed.
Yeah, I think they're in pretty bad shape. So I think you'd have a really hard time trying to secure a publishing contract right now. Because even though this will pass, they're not going to be passing out contracts, even though it's going to take them a year and a half to get your book out because they're very slow with that kind of stuff. But you're kind of looking at a business that is very in big trouble and needs to be reorganized in a big way. I'm not sure if there's good optionality to buying into that system right now.
Yeah. This is an easy question. What traditional publishers? Yeah, go indie, man. Go new pub. There's no reason not to. There's none. And like David said, you really can't go trad pub right now. They're not accepting any new submissions because they can't get the paper to print their books. I mean, okay, step with me over here to just the molten glass-lined impact crater that used to be trad pub. Okay, to borrow like a razor fistism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let me count the ways here. So what you want to ask yourself when deciding on a publishing venture is, okay, here's the old pub contract. How long is it going to take me to beat that contract if I go it alone? And the answer right now is 5 minutes. Because, yeah, go ahead.
First of all, they may not give you an advance at all. In which case, you're kind of at their mercy for how they want to market the book and then give you royalties. If they give you an advance, instead of they're not going to give you a big one now. It won't be hard to recover your investment expenses going indie. And I have a ton of resources on this channel for how to design your book covers. By the way, the book cover for Don't Give Money to People Who Hate You, Brian, you designed that, right? This is
and cover. I see. Yeah, thank you. I see the super chatter in chat right now saying, "Oh, I don't have the money to do my own desktop publishing."
I spent $0 publishing my books, guys. It's all money for me. I'm always in the black. My total production cost for Don't Give Money to People Who Hate You, $0. Zero, guys. Yeah, you even use public domain images. Now I have an ongoing cost with my business where I do have a plan for stock images. It's like $10 a month, but I use it for the YouTube channel. I use it for everything, but and because I am a cover designer too. So it's even.
I learned from you.
Yeah, I mean, I have a ton of resources for how to figure out how to design a cover, what goes into a cover. That's the biggest thing. This is actually a really good cover. I mean, it hits all the words right, and it looks correct in the genre, and it's a bestseller in heresy or something, apostasy and heresy, which is.
It was a bestseller in 3 categories actually: political short reads, religion short reads, and blasphemy, apostasy, and heresy. I like to think because it's. I take that as a badge of honor for the death cult, recognizing me as a member of their out group. So they're calling me a heretic against them, which I am.
Yeah.
But yeah, I learned for you. That is a cover that sells books. I learned to do it by watching David's videos in this very channel. You can too. And that's in my book. And Don't Give Money to People Who Hate You. I pointed toward resources to get off the ground and get in the game.
Yeah.
So definitely go new pub, keep control of your IP, make more money, and reach more people. Also, as far as agents, anyone can call himself a literary agent. Nick Cole's he should call fire your agents, because there were a couple of big scandals of agents just stealing millions from their authors. Because in Old Pub, the way you get paid, the publisher does not give your royalty check to you. The publisher
gets the royalty check supposed to take his 15% or whatever.
Yeah, and if you think right now, when agents are starving, they're not going to get sticky fingers. I got a bridge to sell you.
Yeah. Here's the thing too about an agent. Like, the entire industry exists for people who know each other to give each other money, basically on your back as an author. And why can't I talk to a publisher directly? I don't know. You just can't. It's so that the friends of the people who work at the publishing house have a job called being a literary agent. It's like, you got to go through me because I know the publishers. It's like, well, can you just give me their phone number? No, I'll decide what books are going to get published, and then I give it to them, and maybe they publish it too. So they're friends. It's all like a circle of friends. You have to pay to get into the club, and then you're going to pay that person like 50% of your royalties just for talking to someone they went to school with, basically.
Yeah, and for people who are really quick, I want to interject. For people who are suffering an economic pinch right now because of Corona Chain, like may have been laid off, getting into self-publishing is one of the best subsidiary income streams you can start right now, because whereas Old Pub is really feeling the hurt, ebook sales are approaching holiday season levels now, guys.
Yeah, they went. I thought there's a big crash coming. I still think there might be because we're looking at saturation and stuff prior to this. But then this thing hit and everyone started buying more ebooks.
They need stuff to do.
Turn completely around, And I'd say my YouTube business is down quite a bit, but the book business is fine. And it's doing, I wouldn't say it's better than ever, but it's doing just fine. I'm continuing to sell books really without any problems. And so I don't know, I'm doing fine with it. So in general, I tell people, like, hey, if you want to do trad publishing, you can always try. And the question for you is how long you want to try before you want to just do it yourself. For me, I like to just write my books and put them out. I don't like waiting 18 months for a book to come out. I don't want to do that. But a lot of people, I just want to address this. People buy into the gatekeeper complex where they think that there's something special about a couple of people working at an imprint saying that your book should be printed upon paper that makes you special. You know, I said this too about, this person has a doctorate degree in Zonde witchcraft. I'm like, that's a doctorate and 3 people liked you. 3 people liked you, called your dissertation committee and gave you a doctorate. That's all it really takes to get a higher level degree is 3 people on a committee who like you. And that's the same thing with publishing. It just takes a couple people who like you. They put your book on paper. I really want my book to be in stores. What stores? What stores? They're all closed.
Yeah, because Old Pub is not in the story business. They're in the lumber business. They control the paper distribution monopoly that requires brick and mortar stores to push the product. They do not control Amazon, and that's why they're dying now, because 1, they can't get the paper put in the stores, and even if they could, 2, the stores are closed.
Yep. Yeah, the stores are closed. And I don't know how many of them are going to reopen. Ebooks hurt my eyes. Now you can buy on-demand paperbacks. Every single one of my books is available as a paperback, and some of them are available as audiobooks. So I will give you I'll give you the Bounty Earl for Keys to Prolific Creativity. So if you want to join Audible, if anyone hasn't joined Audible, if you join it, I'll get a little bit of money as a thank you for getting somebody to join Audible. And if you're already in it, you can just buy the book and enjoy it, because it's a good book and it's me reading it. Otherwise, you can read it for free again on the channel and get that way if you're really poor. I try to provide avenues for everybody to get some books, at least get something to get there. And we have that free Corona Chan anthology. I forgot to promote this. Brian's in this.
Oh yeah, plug Corona Chan. Yeah.
He's at the top. I think I put him at the top.
You did.
Corona Chan, spreading the love.
Remember when you signed up for Audible through that link?
Apparently,
Bounty.
Yeah. There it is. Okay, so here it is. The ebook is free, or you can get the paperbacks like $7. It's less than $7 for this huge magazine giant thing. But there's a full book in there by me, and there's a full book there's a bunch of long and short stories, lots of varying lengths. So we had fun. We put this together in a couple of days as a free ebook for entertainment, so everybody could have something to read during this lockdown or whatever. And so you can check it out. It's got a story by Brian in there called Anacyclosis.
Ties into my Comet Frame Exceed series and features the very mech you see in my Avi there.
There it is. All right, so you can read that. Mine is called Crown of Sight. It's got some esoteric philosophy in it that you'll like, but it's just a good yarn too about an evil race of orc-like beings called Dryson, besieging an elven city and all the weirdness that flows from that. Now, Alexander, I was going to mention, I guess somebody gave it like a 3-star review and wrote like a freaking essay about how he didn't like the way that a character awkwardly wore a baldric. I had a character wear a baldric and his sword awkwardly hit his legs. And he's like, that's dumb. It's like, what do you think that meant? It meant he didn't know how to wear a sword. It was a sword he wasn't used to. It's like the reading comprehension of some of these people that write essays is just abysmally low sometimes. It's like I completely ruined my suspension of disbelief. I'm like, the giant gray-skinned orc sitting upon a throne made of human skin didn't make you suspend your disbelief. The guy wearing the baldric incorrectly to show that he was inexperienced in battle is what made you. And it's just like, and there was lists of this stuff. I finally looked at it today. I just had such a good laugh. I kind of want to. Should we read it on stream? It's pretty funny.
Yeah,
it's pretty funny. Let me see if I can find it.
I try to adhere to the professional principle of don't respond to negative reviews. But in this case, it's for the sake of entertainment. Yes.
Yeah. I never read reviews. Here's the Corona Chan anthology. You can get it for free. It's just a bunch of cool free stories. And the whole point is like, if you don't like one story, you can just go to the next one. Who cares?
Yeah.
Right. It's like I pick up sci-fi magazines. If I don't like a story, I just skip it. Oh man, this thing is long. I don't know if I want to read this whole thing. I don't know if I want to read the whole thing. Let me find some highlights here.
While he's looking, I will also say the importance of reviews. If maybe you don't have the pocket change right now to pick up a book, leave a review on Amazon of an author's book you read that you liked. As my buddy Adam Lane Smith points out, over the life of a book, each review you leave is basically a $50 tip in the author's pocket.
Yeah. So if I won't advertise a book unless I have a certain number of reviews, but it's the social proof that sells. A review is more valuable than 10 book sales to me. or about as valuable, let's say, but really more valuable early on. Like, I would rather give you a free book and have you get a review than have you buy the book. A lot more, because that review is going to help me sell it to 10, 20, 100 more people. Right. Let's see if we can find some. Oh, I can't go through it.
It's hard.
It's hard.
And as I realized, we're saying, hey, review our books. And then, hey, look at this guy who reviewed our book wrong.
It. It's just
this is so wrong.
Oh, yeah. He got upset that somebody wrote something about American Revolution. The British were bad. The British are not merely brutal, but demonic and utterly depraved. It's like, okay. I don't know. It's just, I really don't want to get too deep into it. It's just, it was just
How
one of those.
How dare you make the British the villains in a story about the American Revolution?
Yeah. And it's just like, it just kept going on, lists and lists about, I Google searched Baldric because, I didn't understand. It's like, you Google searched a thing that you thought I didn't use correctly. You didn't think about what that meant. It's like if somebody's holding his gun improperly, what would you take that to mean in a story? Come on. It's just full of stuff like that. I don't know if there's any other highlights. My gosh, he just goes on and on about this Baldric in my story.
Well, there are guys who, I think, to give him the benefit of the doubt, David, he may have actually thought he was being helpful and giving us feedback to improve, but there's a fine line here where, again, you're back to playing by that Nash distribution again. So the Pareto strategy. So like there was this one review on Comet Frame Exceed, one of my books, where like it basically hand sold the guy the book on another author's blog. Well, here you might like this, because you're like, oh yeah, I'm a culture warrior and I'm on you guys' side and I like helping out guys on my side, and starts out leaving a 3-star review and claims like, yeah, well, I lived in Japan for 3 years, and the author clearly has no understanding of like Japanese culture, Japanese language, and Nihongo Ninan de Benkyou shimasu yo. So I studied Japanese for 2 years. And it's like, they're named after counting classifiers. You clearly didn't see that. And then he lowered it to 2 stars after saying, well, I couldn't finish it. It's like, okay, you couldn't finish it. He gave a review that really didn't give me any useful feedback. It was just heckling, and you're claiming to be on my side. Don't be that guy.
Yeah, don't be that guy. I've seen stuff. I wrote a samurai story too. And I've never really had people like get upset about, I keep waiting for someone to get upset about cultural appropriation, but it just doesn't really happen. It's like, you're culturally appropriating the Japanese culture. I'm like, well, neither one of us lived during the Muromachi period, so I think we're okay. It's like, why didn't he call this? I remember someone got upset that I called the handle of a sword a handle. It's like, it's called a hilt. I'm like, hilt literally means handle. They're exact synonyms,
It's fun to vent. We don't often get to vent like this.
Yeah, it's like hilt literally means handle. There's nothing to fix. Anyway,
yeah.
But sometimes people get, I've had people. Someone got upset that I had a children's fairy story about a princess, and she had a hunting dog, right? And she went hunting. Now, women hunted in the Middle Ages. It was actually a popular pastime for both sexes. Now, they hunted different things, but women actually hunted in the Middle Ages because it was a way that you could get food. And it was also something that the nobility engaged in for fun. So, of course, she had a hunting dog. Well, this completely suspends my disbelief. It's like people who think they know something about history, but then don't. Like, they're upset that something contradicts their idea of what history is in a fairy tale for children that takes place in a fantasy universe with dragons.
I like to think they hunted platypuses.
People are just, I have no idea what these people are thinking with this. It's got to be torture going through life feeling like that all the time.
Yeah, sad.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we really are need to call it here. It's been almost 3 hours of this, but I really appreciate everybody jumping in and talking to us during this time. And I appreciate all the super chats. I really, really do. You can buy Brian's book. It's called Don't Give Money to People Who Hate You. And it's It's out now. It's a bestseller. Links are in the chat, and I'll have them in the description. I do recommend you buy it. It gets my recommendation. It's 5 stars for me. 5 stars. 2 enthusiastic thumbs up.
Yeah, and it's not just negative, like David was saying. One of the top reviews says this book left me feeling energized and hopeful. And that's what it's there to do. It's there to give you hope, because our hope is in Christ and him crucified and risen. And we can use our God-given talents to consecrate the world to him and have a blast while we're doing it. Good is fun. It's enemy propaganda that evil is fun.
Otherwise, you can check out Corona Chan. It's free. I have that one linked in the chat as well. It's got both me and Brian in it, and it's a fun free read. There's going to be something in it for somebody, so please do check that out. And my newest book, The Keys to Prolific Creativity, it's out right now. $2.99 for the ebook, or you can get the audiobook, or you can get the paperback for $8, whatever your reading preference wants. And it's all about designing your creative process so that you can finish your projects on time and under budget, get things done, and have a body of work to build a career. That's really what this is about. So it works for musicians, artists, whoever is looking to put out art into the world. There's going to be a ton of writing stuff in it, obviously, because I'm a writer, and there's also a lot of music stuff in it because I'm a musician too. So check that out, and we'll see you guys next time. Anything else that you'd like to add, Brian?
Yeah, I would like to add The Keys to Prolific Creativity to Don't Give Them to People Who Hate You. I think they're great companion pieces. So get my book, learn the why, learn what has gone so horribly wrong with pop culture, and get take the first steps toward fixing it yourself. And then get David's book if you want to take the plunge and make your own stuff, to show you how to buckle down and get in a flow state and turn out saleable work.
All right. So thanks so much, guys. And we will see you all next time.